Today's episode is brought to you by Gray Block Pizza, and you know that. Today's episode is brought to you by You Can Clothing. For anyone who's ever been told that they cannot do something, this is the clothing for them. This is the clothing that says, hey, I defy adversity. Think about something you can do. Can you do it? Yes. That's what You Can Clothing is all about. Sometimes people say, oh, you can't jump over that love shack on that motorbike. You know what I'm saying? You can't hop over a set of twin sisters on a unicycle, while you got a mouthful of fresh owl eggs. Guess what? You can. That's right. So go to defyadversity.com and you'll get 10% off with the promo code VON. They got training wear and street wear. So if you're training or if you're street, then you're covered. You can. Today's episode is brought to you by this beautiful hood hat. Now, everybody sometimes wants to have a hat that's very specific to their neighborhood, to their area, even to the stoop outside of their apartment complex. Well, guess what? Now you can. This one we have right here is Bed-Stuy. Bed-Stuy, you know it. Rocka, Chris Rock, Jay-Z, Lil' Kim, Tracy Morgan, Jackie Robinson, all from Bed-Stuy. And at Hood Hats, you can get all type of New York style hats that are specific to your hood. Quit running around with a hat that just says New York on it. That's not enough. That might not be part of your life. Get specific. And you can do that with Hood Hats. The New York collection just dropped. This hat is made from 100% merino wool. From those beautiful merino animals out there. You ever seen a merino sheep? Damn, they soft, dude. They're not even usually awake because they're so soft they just fall asleep even if they try to stand up. It's just like cashmere feels really soft on your head. These are made in the USA, America. They have 11 total New York hats, and they are ready to ship. You can go check these out. We'll put the link right here below. Just go to hoodhat, HOODHAT.com, and grab these beautiful hitters, man. Think about your head. Where is it? Well, it could be inside of a hat. And that's factual right there. A hat is basically like an apartment for your head. So if your head is homeless, man, change that up and get that Bed-Stuy. They got all types, Hood Hat or at Hood Hat USA. I'll throw them up on my Instagram as well. These hats, so specific. Get specific, hoodhat.com. Today's guest is a psychology professor at the University of Toronto. He's a critical thinker. He's an orator. He's a speaker. He's currently on tour. He's also the creator of Self-Authoring, which is a program that can help you examine your past, establish your present, and plan your future. There'll be a link to that program below. And he also, right when he got here, wanted to offer our listeners and viewers a discount. And that code is THEO, Theo, and you can use that for a discount whenever you purchase Self-Authoring. We're so happy to have him here today, Mr. Jordan B. Peterson. Thanks for coming in, Jordan.
Hey, my pleasure.
Really appreciate it, and I know our listeners are excited. Are you finding, like, it seems like you've come into people's lives like a hurricane really recently. Do you feel that?
Yeah, and I feel this has come into my life like a hurricane too.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time teaching, and so I was used to interactions with reasonably large groups of people, and I did some media work in Canada before all of this blew up. So it didn't come as a total surprise. And I had my videos out on YouTube for quite a while. So there's been, what do they say? It takes 10 years to become an overnight success. And so all of this has been building in multiple ways, but when it took off, it really took off like madly. And that was about a year and 8 months ago, something like that. And it hasn't stopped for a second, which is really, I keep thinking, well, the first week I thought, well, that's my 15 minutes and that's that, and I had smaller 15 minutes before that, but it's hard the fact that it doesn't end is very hard to understand.
Right.
So, but I'm coming to terms with it. I think part of it is that, you don't want to attribute to yourself what can be attributed to the situation. It's a protection against egoism, hey?
That ego's a trap.
Yes, it certainly is. And so there's all these people coming out to listen to my lectures. I've done 50 cities now in about 5 months, and most of the theaters that I've been speaking at have had 2,500 to 3,000 people. So it's a lot of people. I'm thinking, what the hell's going on here? It's like, and then I thought, I see part of it anyways. And it's part of what you're involved in too, is that, there's a new technology.
Yeah.
YouTube isn't a technology. Online video on demand is a technology.
Right.
And online video on demand that has no barrier of cost to production is a new technology.
Correct.
And podcasts are a new technology, and they're major technologies. So about 2 years ago, 2 years and a few months, I noticed that I had passed 1 million views on YouTube. Because I'd started putting my lectures up just out of curiosity. And I thought, wow, okay, what the hell am I supposed to make of that? 1 million is a lot. If I sold 1 million books, I'd be happy. It never happens. Like it's a runaway bestseller. You never get 1 million citations for a scientific paper. That never happens.
Never.
1,000 is a hell of a collection for citations. I thought, well, what is this place that was reserved for cute cat videos? And I thought, and all these people, they're watching these university lectures. They're high-level lectures, and there's a huge public market for it. I thought, well, that's really interesting. It's like, and then I thought, I see. Here's what's going on. This is a Gutenberg revolution. The spoken word is now as powerful as the written word. It's just as widely distributable, and more people can access it because they don't have to read, and it uses found time, and there's no barrier to entry, and people can communicate back because they can cut the videos. It's like, I see, this is a revolution.
Right.
And so then I think, I see what's happening is the people who are at the forefront of this are being cascaded forward like a surfer on a giant wave on this technological transformation. And so, obviously people are responding to my content, but a huge part of it is, there's a whole new medium, and it's two of them. YouTube, that's a big deal. Video on demand like that.
Yes.
Which also enables long-form discussion.
Long-form, which is huge.
You bet. But then podcasts, they might even be a bigger deal.
Yeah.
Because people use found time. And so that's really helped me put it in perspective. I'm actually happier about that because, you might think, well, isn't it gratifying to know that your message is reaching, now it's millions of people. And it's like, yeah, but if there's danger in that. It's like, well, what the hell? Why am I at the center of this or as center of this? Like, is there something special about my message? Is there something special about me? It's like, and you might think, well, I hope so. It's like, no, you don't necessarily hope so.
Yeah.
It's
very dangerous. The ego is very dangerous, I find.
Well, yeah, and it also puts you in a very peculiar position. And it's like, oh no, I see what's happening is I'm an early adopter of a revolutionary technology. Oh yes, that's good. And then fine, I'm competent at it, and hopefully what I'm doing is helpful, but let's not underestimate the technology.
Right. Let's not underestimate. I know you mentioned on Joe Rogan's recent episode that how you were a surfer and not the wave itself.
Yes, exactly.
Do you find though that do you find can you start to see how dangerous and powerful the ego can be though a little bit? Because I even noticed in my own life, starting to sell out shows and stuff in the past year, and people coming and people being excited to spend time with me.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not even about the word. It's just about maybe who they, relate to you as a person.
Yeah.
But I do notice that it can be very dangerous. I see how that can be extremely dangerous if I don't stay in a place where it's not about me.
Well, I think the best antidote to that. Well,
that's what I'm asking.
Some of it is
do you
age.
Have any,
well, I'm older, and so I think it's less. All that's less tempting for me.
Right.
And I've had a lot of clinical experience in that sort of thing, and I also know why it's necessary to keep your ego under control, and that's certainly the case also if you do psychotherapy, because people, you're in a position of authority, let's say, and it's easy for that to become inflated. But it's not good for you and it's not good for your clients. You have to keep your feet on the ground. And they're not coming to you for sage advice, clients. They're actually coming to you so that you can listen to them figure out how to sort their own lives out. That's a really important distinction. And then with regards to the people coming to see me, the proper attitude towards that, and I think this is true for any performer, is gratitude. You bloody well be happy those people are there. And so I'm careful. I do meet and greets after the events. And I'm watching myself to make sure that I'm always happy to meet the next person, you know, because I know that if I start getting tired of it, maybe it's only from exhaustion, you know, that I should stop doing it, because it is an absolute privilege to have these people come, and you should never take that for granted. And you should never think there's something, you know, spectacularly special about yourself that's attracting these people, and that somehow you're above them and they're your fans, or, you know, that there's this real power differential, even though that sort of manifests itself because people are so happy to see you.
Right.
But that's a dangerous pathway. And I truly am ridiculously overwhelmed and grateful and happy and pleased that all these people show up. And especially because of what also is happening, you know, what I'm trying to do.
You seem like it. You know, one of the things that I found most powerful in your recent episode with Joe Rogan, to keep citing that, but that you know, you talked about how many people came out, and then you talked about a Latino boy.
Yeah.
You actually had it was fun. I thought the joke was pretty funny, how you're like, when two guys run up on you downtown, sometimes it's a little bit alarming usually. Yeah. But it was a Latino boy and his father, and they were talking about how their relationship had gotten better since they'd somehow gotten you into their life.
Yeah. Well, they were working hard the boy in particular, the young guy, was working hard in particular. Obviously, his father was responding, but the young guy had made that a priority. He had decided he was going to fix his relationship with his father, and then it was working. It's like, yeah, well, that's just great. And I hear stories like that all the time, just nonstop.
And how does that make you feel though? Like, I noticed that makes you, what is that feeling though?
Well, I'm thrilled.
Right.
And you know, it's funny to use that word, because I often teach people to negotiate for their salaries. It's like, okay, you're negotiating for a new job, you're negotiating for a raise. What should you ask for? That's easy. Figure out how much you'd have to be paid so that you were thrilled to have the job. And then tell the person, look, you know, you got to be reasonable about it.
Right.
You know, it's got to be within the bounds of sensibility, you know. But you might think, okay, well, I need to be able to get up in the morning and think, God, it's so good that I get to go do this job. It's like, okay, how much do you have to be paid to do that? And you can ask yourself that about almost anything that someone asks you to do. It's like, okay, if I'm going to do this, what are the preconditions for me so that I would be thrilled to do it? And then, well, then you can tell the person, and they aren't burdening you, and you get to be thrilled.
Right.
And with what I'm doing right now, well, I am thrilled, because I truly believe that the way out of this idiot political polarization we're in, and the danger we're in, the existential danger, is for people to get their lives together, individuals, one by one. And every time one individual gets their life together, that actually measurably makes the world a better place. And I truly believe that. And so it isn't that I believe it, it's that I've figured out why that's true. It's not the same thing as just believing it.
Right. You've seen it.
Well, I've seen it lots of times. And I also know that, like, you're not an isolated dust mote among 7 billion specks. It's like your network, man.
Yeah.
Like, you know, well, you're a really good example of that. You have a lot of influence. It's like it actually matters whether you have your life together. You're influencing a lot of people, and then they're influencing other people. So
it's teamwork. I mean, I noticed even just starting this podcast, right, which we started around the same time as yours, that I now show up for the podcast because the listeners show up for me. It's really fascinating. Right. You know, it's like I'll come in at extra hours and do extra things because I want us to be a part of each other's lives.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great philosophy for making it work, because the other thing you have to do, and I've been trying to do this with this book, and also with I published this book, and I told the publishers, look, man, I'm all in. I'm doing everything I possibly can to make, and I mean everything, flat out, to make this book a success, because that's why I wrote it. I'm not half in. I'm all in. And if you're all in, well, first of all, that increases the chance of success. It's actually the only way of testing whether you have the chance of success. You got to be all in.
You got to be all in. And that means for anything. That means a book, a job, a relationship, anything.
You got to be all in. And it's even true if it's you might think, well, I work in a diner, and it's like, should I be all in that? It's like, yeah, man, you could make that a good diner.
Yeah. And
then everybody that comes in there could have a good 20 minutes, half an hour, a decent meal, you know, a little break. They could have a good cup of coffee. They could have some fresh orange juice.
Yeah.
It could be a good part of their life. And then you'll learn how to make a good diner and a place that's hospitable to people. You learn how to treat people properly, and you'll learn how to treat your customers properly and make your business grow. And then even if you stop doing that, even if you're being a waiter or waitress, you know, which when I was a waiter for in many places, I've worked in many restaurants. It's like you can learn an awful lot doing that. And then if you want to go do something that's different, then you can bring everything you learn from that forward. And it's not trivial. It's not a trivial thing to be a good waitress or a good host or a good short order cook, man. Those are Those are tough jobs. And if you do them well, it matters. So,
do you find? I find when I'm in, when I'm in your home country, when I'm in Canada, people, there seems to be, there's some infection in America. Sometimes I feel that we've lost a sense of like pride or a sense of self, that there is value in even doing like the small things. And in in Canada, I was just performing in Calgary for a couple of nights and had a blast. People are so nice. I mean, like, you could literally have one leg and somebody would come up and give you their their leg, and they'll just stand there, like a flamingo, and just, let you go live your life. I mean, people are just so affable and so kind. But but there seemed to be a little bit more sense of like Canadian pride there. And in America, I feel like we've lost a little bit of that pride, like in ourselves, but also even in our country, just an overall pride issue, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that's been under assault, the idea that you should have pride in your country, that's kind of a fascist thing, or that you should, what would you say, have respect for your founding principles. That idea is sort of under assault, the idea that this is a corrupt patriarchy and that it's an oppressive state. And it's like, well, it's corrupt, except compared to every other system that's ever existed.
Right, we're doing a lot better than so many.
Oh, well, yeah, and the degree to which American ideals, but Western ideals more generally, have made their manifestation throughout the world is producing a massive increment in living quality everywhere.
Yeah.
There's lots of, look, it's not like our systems don't have problems. They have problems, like all systems. But as far as systems go, man, we're running on 8 cylinders.
Yeah.
We're doing all right. And so,
yeah, suddenly it's like we're doing so badly.
Yeah, and
I love how suddenly it's happened. Like all of a sudden, everything is horrible. And really, when you get out into the world, most things are fine. I'm noticing, especially in America, it's a lot of the media is just saying that things are bad, and then it's a lot of people sitting at home sharing that information. Yeah, well, I think when you go outside, it's not that way. That people are generally being pretty decent to each other.
I think part of what's happening is that as the classic media die under the onslaught of this technological pressure, especially television, because television has had it.
Oh, it's so it's too efficient. It's efficient to the point where it's not effective, I think.
Well, and the bandwidth is so narrow and it's so heavily advertised, and you get turned into a commodity on TV. No matter how good your character is, it tends to turn you into a commodity because of the narrow bandwidth. And so I think what's happening as the media, and of course the print media, is just facing competition on every possible front, right? Because so many people have access to writing and sharing. Well, exactly. There's nothing special about being a journalist anymore, essentially.
And it's jumped the shark in the past year. Like, it's fascinating how quickly all of that just hit almost rock bottom.
Oh, yeah, man. It's unbelievably fast. Well, that just shows you how powerful the technologies are. But, I think as the traditional media dies, they get desperate for attention. They get all clickbaity. So they exaggerate the polarization and the catastrophe. The best example of that is there's way more coverage of violent crime than there was 25 years ago, but there's half as much violent crime. Like, in the 5 major measures of violent crime have fallen by 50% in the last 25 years. Like, who knows that? No one. Oh, it's dangerous. The streets are dangerous. We're all at each other's throats. It's like, no, we're not. It's safer now in the United States than it's ever been. It's safer now than it was in the early 60s. You'd never guess that.
Well, and it's funny. I was just back. I went back to my hometown, which is a small town in Louisiana. And you said you're from a similar. We just figured out before we started, about 4,000 people size town. And I was asking some of the teachers at my junior high school. I said, "Well, what is racism like here now?" Because my town was just poor black and poor white mostly. And she goes, "You know what?" And this is a girl who'd went to school with me and who's now the principal there. She goes, "You'd be surprised." She goes, "It's gotten so much better." She's like, "We just don't have, we definitely have some differences in class for sure still, but we don't have as much just outright racism anymore." And that was, and for that to happen, like in my town, like I grew up in a town, there was a lot of there was a lot of, when I was growing up, there wasn't even any black wealth. I mean, there was like the Dallas Cowboys, and I think like Eddie Murphy were the only wealthy black people that you even heard about in the whole universe. And then now, it's a lot different in America. Like, you can go to Atlanta where you get to see like a lot of black prosperity, and some of that's just taken time. But I wondered sometimes, like, man, will some of these smaller towns, places where I'm from, will they ever be able to get some of that, that guttural, like, vulgarity of old racism, of old practices out of our system, out of our DNA, and to hear that firsthand from people that I trust, teachers at this school, that's getting better. It kind of like, it was like, wow, because that's crazy. Because if you click on anything online, everybody's, killing each other over racist ideals.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just the world that I live in, that I see, is a lot much better than the world that's online. And I think people are starting to realize that.
Yeah, I think they are too.
People are awakening so fast. Mm-hmm. And that brings me to authenticity. Like, do you feel like for you, because there's a lot of voices out there, and you are on a platform now where it's bigger and people can talk more and people can, nobody's clicking on the one sentence anymore because they know the one sentence, it's part of a huge conversation. They don't even get to know what it all happened. And now they want the whole conversation.
Yeah, that's right.
They want to know who that is. But do you feel like for you, that you're coming along at like I'm 38, I mean, I'm kind of a late bloomer, so I'm kind of maybe like 32 really, but I'm also like an old soul. So I guess I'm actually like, I'm back at 38. But
it was a quick trip.
Yeah, sorry, it was.
Yeah.
But, I grew up in a time like, a lot of our fathers and my friends' fathers, like, they got divorces, they went for like younger women, or they gave into this idea that they could have it all, I saw my mother not, have to work hard and not get a kiss on her forehead before bed, like she always had to be the one giving out any affection in our house. Mm-hmm. I noticed that, there's a lot of men my age who, it's not about the fight. There's nothing for us to do. You can't reprimand your children anymore. You can't fight anymore. It's more about lawyers. It's like, I just feel like there's a lot of men arriving at a point in their lives where they're like, what is it? Is there any value in me even being a man? And like our fathers were in wars, and our fathers were in military, and there was some, I was an American, but I feel like there's this aimless kind of, there's a lot of men wandering around aimlessly.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of confusion too, but
they're listening to you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, well, men,
they're finding you.
Yes.
Like, it's like you're like this cool stepdad that showed up that actually like cares about our mom or something.
Mm-hmm.
That's
a good one.
Not to put a pressure on you.
No, that's a good one.
But
that's a good one.
I'm noticing from some of my like esteemed friends, men that are way smarter than me, and men that have bigger hearts than me, and they're reaching out to me. They're so excited. They're like, "Oh, you have Jordan coming in today. He touches me. Like they feel connection."
Yeah, well, I'm actually, as I said, I'm actually thrilled. And when, and all sorts of people are coming up to me after the talks and on the streets and so forth and saying it. And a fair number of them are guys, often younger, but not always. And, they want to come up and tell me something good that they've done. And I'm thrilled about it. It's like, good, man, get out there, kill it.
Yeah.
And the idea, like, because part of what's happened in the dialogue in our culture is that masculine responsibility, the willingness to shoulder responsibility, which is part of what factors into achievement and ambition. It's really the part of it that's only positive, is being confused with tyranny and oppression, and so that men are, in large part, being punished for their best impulses.
Right.
Like, you want to get out there and like do something. It's like, well, doing things wrecks the earth. Right. It's like, well, the earth is wrecking us, so it's only just that we defend ourselves a little bit. Yeah. But it's also just wrong. It's like that willingness to go out there and contend with the world, to go on your adventure, right, and to take the risks, and the entrepreneurial risks, and the risks of discipline, and the risks of responsibility, and to buttress and support the family system and the community system. That's all incredibly laudable. But for me, it's more than that, because I think of it as a bulwark against hell. And I mean that both literally and metaphysically. It's like, it's actually vital that you take your place in the world and you find a meaningful, responsible path forward, because it's in that pathway that you find the meaning in your life, and that buttresses you against the catastrophe of life. And if you don't have that, you have the aimlessness and the suffering and the pointlessness and your own malevolence and bitterness. It's hell. Yeah. And then you make hell for you, and you make hell for your family, and you make hell for the community. It's like, none of that's good. And so whenever I see people step away from that and they're moving forward and they're telling me about it, I think, and I really think Great. That's a miracle, man. Keep it up. Like, it's really important. And I don't care what you're doing. You know, and I have lots of respect for working class guys. I mean, I came from a little town. I've had all sorts of working class jobs. You know, I worked as a short order cook, and I worked as a bartender in a rough cowboy bar, a couple of them. I worked as a drill bit retipper and a gas jockey, and I worked on a rail crew putting railway lines through, and worked as a beekeeper and then plywood mill, lots and lots of jobs like that. And, you know, and I've renovated houses, and so I've worked with lots of contractors and so forth. And I think working class guys, the whole bloody world rests on their shoulders. It really matters if they do a good job. And so a lot of working class guys come to my shows and they say, look, I've been listening to your lectures while I'm doing long haul trucking or while I'm working in my forklift, whatever. I think, great, man, get the hell at it. Do your job properly.
Do it.
You bet. And do it right. Support your family. Man the hell up. Live a responsible life. And what you're doing is valuable. I don't care what anyone else has to say about it.
Yeah, I've heard, I'm in a 12-step program. I'm in an AA, right? So I was I'm in recovery, so almost 2 years now. And that really changed my life, getting into, 12 steps. And, and I know that's your book, but one of the things that stuck with me is esteemable people do esteemable things. And it's like,
right.
And it's like when you have that choice to do something,
it's better than
right.
alcohol, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, if you're trying to stop drinking, you need something better than alcohol. And alcohol's pretty good.
Yeah.
So you better find something a lot better, man. Yeah. And it is. And then esteemable people do esteemable things. It's like, yeah, well, you want to figure out something that you're doing with your life that's worth not getting drunk and screwing up.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's fun.
Yeah, you want to have something on the other side of that teeter-totter that has some value to you.
You bet. And so that you can think, no, I'm not going to get drunk and screw that up.
Right.
Because, you might say, well, why do people drink too much? It's like, if you like alcohol, that's a stupid question.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, why do people drink too much? Well, because it's great.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so why stop? Well, you do stupid things when you're drunk. You hurt yourself. You compromise your health. It's really hard on the people around you. You tend to turn into a liar, and it screws up your life.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, but it's pretty fun. Yeah, well, it is. But you need something better than that. And what's better isn't being straight and not making mistakes. It's like that's all prohibition in some sense. What's better is, no, you need an adventure, man. You need to get out there and have something to do.
Yeah.
And something worth waking up for. And that's the substitute for the addiction. Actually, the addiction is the substitute for that, if truth be known.
Right, but eventually you can flip that around and you can find that the much girthier and more. There's a lot of sexy weight in having self-worth, and that's what I've started to slowly find in my life.
Yeah, and you might also, like, the thing too is, there's something kind of, I don't know, the bar scene, the heavy drinking scene, there's something kind of edgy about it, and something kind of adventurous about it. And, you see that it's kind of dramatized in people like Tom Waits, who's got that real hard edge, or Johnny Cash, or people, hard-living guys.
Oh, yeah. Guys with 6 or 7 livers in them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, there's something kind of romantic about that.
Yes.
And fair enough, but, well, then what that means is you have to build something like that into your own life. So maybe you need to take an adventurous trip now and then. You got to have something there that's edgy to replace that.
And sometimes if people need a catalyst, so there's that moment, right? Like for me, the catalyst was like, I needed to I was experimenting with cocaine and I sacrificed like a neat job opportunity with that. I had planned on being there for the job. And next thing you know, I'd spent the night doing cocaine. Right. So I realized, okay, this is a little out of my control, so I have to make this. But if people don't have that sort of, how do they create? Is there a way to create their own catalyst? Like you just said, like take a trip
one thing. Okay, so one of the things we talking about is I have this program online called. You can find it at selfauthoring.com, or you can find it on my website.
Yep, and we'll put both the links right here.
Okay, so one of the programs help you write about your life. And by the way, you don't have to be able to write very well to do this. And if you do it badly, that's just fine as long as you do it, because doing it is badly is way better than not doing it at all, which is kind of like a motif for life, right? Get the hell out there and do it. You're not going to do it perfectly, but it's better than not doing it at all. You'll make your mistakes, but you'll learn. One part of the program, which is the future authoring program, helps people develop a plan for their life. You actually need a plan for your life, because the thing is, a plan gives you goals, things to aim at. And like, imagine you went to the shooting range and you didn't have a target. Well, what the hell fun is that? What are you going to do? Shoot your rifle into the air? There's nothing about that that's useful.
Shoot your friend, shoot your wife.
You're still shooting,
Right.
but it's not fun.
Right. There's no game.
That's right. And the game is to hit the damn target. Okay, so first of all, there's no game without a target. All right, so fine, you need a target. And then you might say, well, is the game worthwhile? And the answer might be, well, how challenging is the place that you put the target? If it isn't challenging enough, if it's challenging enough, the game will be worthwhile. Well, there you go. That's the secret to life. It's like, if what you're aiming at is challenging enough, the game will be worthwhile. Well, it's not worthwhile. It's like, well, reconfigure your aims then. You're not aiming high enough. By your own judgment, say, well, this isn't meaningful. It's like, hey, man, you're not aiming high enough, because if you were, it would be meaningful.
Yeah.
Okay, so while the future authoring program says, like, look, the first thing you want to do is decide that you're responsible for taking care of yourself like you're someone hypothetically worthwhile. Okay, so that's the first thing. It's like the same, imagine you have a kid and you like the kid and you'd like things to go well for them. So you got to have that attitude towards yourself, despite all your flaws, which are manifold.
And that's hard for a lot of people to get to.
God, yes, and no wonder, because, most of us are fixer-uppers and we need some work. And so it's not so easy to come out with the whole self-love, which is not something I'm not that comfortable with anyways. But the fact that you're not perfect doesn't mean that you aren't worth improving. That's the thing.
I love that.
So, okay, so then the next thing is, so get yourself in that state of mind. Just assume it. Maybe there's something in me worth redeeming. All right, next thing. Assume that if you aim at it, you might at least be able to get close to it.
Okay.
Right? Or that you'll aim at it and miss, but your aim will get better across time.
And you're taking a shot in the right direction.
Yes, that's exactly it. And you're starting to move in the right direction. And even if you haven't got your goals specified properly, as you move towards them, you'll get smarter and you'll be able to make better goals. So you're on the right track.
You're starting to calibrate.
You're starting to calibrate. Exactly what you're doing. You're starting to calibrate. That's exactly it. And then the next issue is, okay, now here's another hypothesis. If you aim at it, you might get it. But you're not going to get it if you don't aim at it.
Right.
You might not get it if you aim at it, but you might get it. So that's at least you're setting up the preconditions.
Right.
Next step. Imagine your life 3 to 5 years down the road, and you get to have what you need and want, assuming you're reasonable. Okay, so these are the things to consider. How would you like your family to be if it could be the way you wanted it to be? What are you going to do with your relationships with your siblings and your parents? What about your kids and your wife? Your intimate relationship, right? If you could have what you wanted, what it would look like, your career or your job, what's it going to be and how are you going to conduct yourself in it? How are you going to educate yourself? Because you're not as smart as you could be. You need to know some more things, because unless your life's perfect, you're too ignorant. That's basically the issue. How are you going to take care of yourself mentally and physically? How are you going to withstand the temptations of drugs and alcohol? What are you going to do outside of your work that's productive, engaging, and meaningful? Okay, so that's 7 things. It's just, even hypothetically, if you could have what you wanted, what would it look like? Okay, next thing. Write for 15 minutes about what your life could be like in 3 to 5 years if you had what you want, just so you know.
If you had what you want.
Yeah, if you had what you wanted, what would it be?
Right.
Like, and don't be ridiculous about it. It has to be. It has to be hypothetically within your. Well, that's it. You can have a castle in the air. Well, except they won't stay in the air. So, like, you know, let's stay with.
There's going to be laws.
Well, there's all.
Are there? You know what I'm saying? Like,
there's going to be laws.
They're going to tax you probably.
And there's going to be other people that you have to take into account. So let's assume this is like in the real world and everything, just so that we can.
Okay. Yes. 100%.
Okay. So do that. Next thing. Take stock of your idiocies and weaknesses and assume that in 3 to 5 years they auger you into the ground and you are in the worst hell you could design for yourself. That's probable. Write out that, because that gives you something to avoid. Because when you're thinking, well, I have something difficult to do. Why the hell should I bother? It's like, oh yeah, so I won't end up in that hell.
Right.
Right. Because part of it is, well, I want to get to where I want to go. That's kind of nice and it's hopeful and it makes you positive. But that's not enough. You also need to be terrified out of your skull.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that properly, well, I'm sure this must have happened when you decided to stop drinking. You must have thought, this isn't good.
I'm not going to be funny anymore. I thought that. I thought there was going to be ramifications. Yeah.
Okay, and so what were they? What did you foresee happening?
I thought I wouldn't be funny. I thought that people wouldn't like me. I thought that I wouldn't be able to meet girls if I wasn't drinking or having drugs or.
Right, so that was what you were afraid of giving up if you stopped drinking.
Right.
What were you afraid of happening if you kept drinking?
I was afraid of not achieving my dreams. I was afraid of, ending up a drug addict. I was afraid of dying in my sleep. Something, or dying under the influence.
Okay, so yeah, it's not like that doesn't happen to comedians.
Right,
it happens a lot.
Yeah, it's one of our go-to moves.
Right. Well, exactly. Well, it's not an occupational hazard because you're up late at night and you're around bars all the time. It is. Because you're up late at night and you're
Chris
partying
Farley right here.
Right. Exactly. Well, and it happened to all sorts of comedians and rock musicians. It usually happens at about 27. Weirdly enough. So you were afraid you're going to die, or you're afraid you're going to become addicted. So let's say what would have life like been like you for you if you were addicted? So you don't have a career anymore.
No.
Right? So you've given all that up and failed. So that's fun. So that's going to drive you even more towards drugs.
Yeah, it would have been all my dreams. It would have been miserable.
Right.
It would have been hell.
Exactly. So why quit drinking? So I don't end up in hell. Hey, there's a reason to stop. And then if you make that hell real, it's like, here's all the details of my personal hell. Yes, let's avoid that.
Right.
So then you have something to run the hell away from.
Right. So now you have something towards and something to run away from. And I'll say this too, if there's any young men or women out there who are listening to Jordan feeling like, well, I don't know if I start doing something different, like my friends are going to act a certain.
Yeah, they are.
They are.
Yeah, that's right.
But you're going to start creating conversations. You're going to become the intrigue because you're going to be bringing something new to the table.
You're also going to find out who your friends are.
Yeah.
Because if you're starting to put your life together and you have friends that object, those are not friends. Those are just people you know. They're not friends, because a friend is someone, this is one of the hallmarks of a friend. Here's 2 hallmarks. A friend is someone you can tell bad news to. And they won't tell you why you're an idiot, and they won't interfere with your suffering. They'll just listen, and maybe they'll suffer along with you. Okay, so you can tell bad news to them, and they won't tell you some worse thing that happened to them. They'll listen, and they'll suffer along with you. But a friend is also someone you can tell good news to. And the friend will say, wow, in this vale of tears, something good happened to you. Great, man.
Congrats.
I'm wonderful. It's rare. It's unlikely. Good for you. I hope 10 more things like that happen. And they're not envious, and they're not jealous, and they're not one-upping you. And if you're trying to get your life together, if you're trying to get your life together and your friends get in the way, that's actually real useful for you, because you've now identified who your friends aren't. And you might think, well, I can't give them up. It's like, oh, yes, you can. And not only can you should, and it would be better for them. Because if they're aiming down and they want you going down with them, there's nothing good about what's happening to them, and there's certainly nothing good about that for you.
Yeah, they're not going to, and then they're going to learn, wow, I'm going to lose friends if I continue in these directions. Yeah.
Exactly.
Why is it hard for people to let go of what's so familiar to them, even if it's bad?
Well, because it's complicated. And the thing, that's a really good question. You discount the risk of familiarity that they're familiar with. So let's say,
because people are in relationships with the drugs and alcohol. People are in relationships with humans. People are in relationships with jobs. People are in relationships with their own selves, and they're living a lie every single day. But it's familiarity.
Yeah. Well, you say, I have a job I hate. It's like, well, yeah, but I'm not dying from it. It's like not as bad as it can be. So you factored in the risks already. They get invisible. You think, well, I can't jump out of this job because what about all the risk? It's like, yeah, no kidding. You got to get your resume in order. You got to send it out. You got to send 50 of the damn things out before anybody will call you back. Then you have to go get interviewed, and maybe you're not any good at that. You have to come up with a story while you're a good employee, and maybe you're not yet, so you have to figure out how to do that. It's like, what about all these risks if I go look for a new job? It's like, yeah, absolutely, man. Those are risks, and they're harsh, and no wonder you're avoiding them. What about the risks for you to stay with this job you absolutely hate? Well, let's think that through. Okay, so I have this dead-end job. I hate it. I'm getting bitter. Where am I going to be in 5 years? I know where, because I've watched this with people. You're going to be just like you are now, except a lot more of what's good about you is going to be gone, and a lot more of what's terrible is going to be amplified. And you're going to be like, in 5 years, you're going to be 10 years older instead of 3 years older.
Yeah.
Right. And
because it kills your spirit somehow.
Oh, man. Yeah. So it's like, you think, oh my God, there's a terrible risk in pursuing this new job. It's like, yeah, there is a terrible risk. There's a terrible risk in you staying with your job right now. And so one of the things that's really, really freeing to understand is that you're screwed no matter what you do. There's no secure path forward. Give it up. It's risk everywhere. You think, oh my God, that's terrible. It's like, yes, except for 2 things. You can pick your risk. That's the first thing. So you get to pick your poison. That's something. And second, you're a lot tougher than you think. So even though there's risk everywhere, if you confront it forthrightly, what you'll find is that you can actually handle the risk. And that's the security.
That's beautiful. And there's so much growth to be had right there when you realize how much, like there were times I was like, man, I could never be a sober person because I'm afraid of, I can't communicate with women, or I'm afraid to, stand around in a circle with tough guys without having like a beer in my hand, or like all these little crutches, I can't. And then I remember when I got like 90 days sober, I was just like, holy shit, man. Like, it was like the first time I'd ever done something like for myself,
Yeah.
And it just, man, it felt unprecedented.
Yeah. Well, it was.
It felt like I'd gone to the moon almost.
How old were you when you started drinking?
I don't know, probably like 17 or 16, kind of regular.
Yeah.
It was pretty basic, and I never did a bunch of it, But my biggest thing was just emotional sobriety. Like I was so drunk on my own insecurities and low self-worth.
Well, alcohol really is a good drug for coping with anxiety. That's why people use it. So it does too. If you really like alcohol, it does two things to you. It makes you more extroverted and enthusiastic while you're on the ascending limb of the blood alcohol curve, which is why you have to keep drinking once you start. Because if you plateau, that goes away. So you got to keep drinking. Okay, so that's one thing. It makes you more enthusiastic and more full of positive emotion. And the second thing it does is reduce anxiety.
Yeah.
And so if you are a bit more socially anxious, and you also have that positive response to alcohol, which everyone doesn't have, by the way, then it's a great drug. But the problem is it's a great drug for the moment.
Right.
Right. There's consequences.
Yeah, the sounds when it's not great.
Well, it also, alcohol is an interesting drug because it actually doesn't make people stupid. This has been tested. Like people who are drunk will take far more risk. And you might say, well, that's because they're too stupid to understand the risk. It's like, no, they're not. If you ask them about the risk when they're drunk, they can outline it perfectly. What it stops them from doing is caring about the risk. It's actually, and that's part of the anti-anxiety component. It's like, the risk is, that's why you can drive around drunk at high speed in a car, which is a really stupid thing to do.
Yeah.
We used to do that in the back roads of northern Alberta. It's fun.
Yeah.
But people died all the time doing it, especially in the winter. It's like, wow, this is great. It's great until your head's gone through the windshield, like so many things.
Yeah.
It's like jumping off a cliff. I'm flying, which is true until the last 1/10 of a second. It's like, then you're not flying, man. It's like, yeah. So alcohol has exactly that effect. It is a great anti-anxiety drug, but it does stop you, and he said it stopped you from learning the skills that you need in a social circumstance to be able to cope with that. So then it actually stops you from dealing with the anxiety. You don't have to learn how to overcome it. That's not good.
Yeah.
So
you're not really learning. You're kind of just staying in the. You're baiting you're kind of meeting the anxiety with a little bit of light medication, but you're never getting through whatever the anxiety was.
Yeah, you don't have to learn the skills. Well, you said you like to stand there with a beer in your hand. Well, it gives you something to do. You didn't know what else to do. And then you didn't have to learn.
Right.
I had the same issue. Like I started drinking when I was 13, probably.
Yeah. And that's late in Canada.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I was way behind my neighbors. They were slugging it back when they were 4.
Oh, I've been in Edmonton and I've seen people. I mean, it's just people love to drink up there.
They
it's just
certainly do.
It's a fun culture, right? It's a cultural thing.
Well, the farther north you go, the more the drinking becomes necessary, especially in the winter. So, and there's not that much to do in those isolated small towns.
Yeah, I drink my own blood probably.
Yeah, well, that's
enough,
it. Well, that's funny. When I used to go back to the little town I was from when I was an adult, even if I hadn't really had anything to drink for years, it was like, well, what are we going to do? Well, let's go to the bar. Why? Well, because there actually isn't anything else to do. So, and so you end up there. But the alcohol it's a hell of a drug, man. You gotta watch it.
Do you think it's going to start get outdated? I start to think that alcohol is almost a drug of the past slowly. Like I could see us like with psychedelics and stuff like that becoming a little bit more in like the common sphere of conversation.
Well, it'd be interesting to see that we just legalized marijuana in Canada. Yeah. Like it's not completely legal yet, but the bill was passed. And so Canada is doing this countrywide experiment. And I know there is some data showing that in counties in the U.S. where marijuana has been legalized, the overuse of opiates for pain has decreased substantially.
That's awesome.
And the crime rates have gone down, interesting. Well, people
Yeah.
stoned on pot. It's like,
Dude, it's
what are
hard
they
to
gonna
pick
do,
somebody's pocket.
Go
Yeah.
break into a building?
Yeah.
I don't think so. You're just not going to get it together to
You might
do
knock
that.
for a long time.
Yeah,
I think you might knock at the front door. I don't think you're going to break in.
And
though.
you're not going to, you might, that's right, you might knock. You're not going to go out, what are you going to go out in the alley and have a fight? No, you're not.
A real slow fight.
Yeah, that's right. Well, while you're watching your hands, like, yeah.
So it's like chess with your hands.
Exactly. That's not going to happen. So, yeah, who knows? Like, I mean, if we had to make a bad drug legal, the worst choice was alcohol. It's definitely the case. You know, and I'm saying that as somewhat of a fan of alcohol. Like,
No, me too. Yeah, I like it.
But it's a bad drug, man.
And is it also starting to become archaic as we get into drugs that are, like, people are using psychedelics more, where people are a little bit curious about drugs that make you think
instead of drugs that make you not think.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, because alcohol is kind of an escape into, well, it's not full unconsciousness, although it certainly can be.
Yeah.
But yeah, and alcohol also makes people aggressive. It's the only drug we know that actually makes people aggressive. So you see a massive effect on crime rates, because half the people who murder someone are drunk.
Oh, yeah.
And half the people who are murdered are drunk. And you're most likely to be murdered by a family member.
Yeah.
So I've been joking with my audiences, is like, well, if you really want to get killed, the best thing to do is go drink with a family member. So, which is actually statistically true, which is terribly comical. It's like, yeah, go get drunk with your family if you want to die.
It's a typical family. I actually have a friend, or an old friend, who killed someone, and he said, honestly, and this is a little bit dark, but he said it was awesome.
Huh. Right.
I mean, he said it was, and this was a bad person. They'd been in a fight. I mean, but yeah, he said there was something. And I mean, this guy's obviously pretty affected. He's kind of caught up in the dark arts, if you will. He's more, if you were watching Harry Potter, he's more like Slytherin than he is like Gryffindor,
Right.
But he said there was something.
Well, it's not like there's no pleasure in mayhem and destruction.
Right.
Right. It's just perhaps something that should be replaced by a better pleasure.
A better pleasure. And I think that's
you
almost...
got to watch it. If there is no meat to the temptation, it would be irrelevant. The dark places that people go are very tempting.
Yeah.
And it's even more complicated than that, because naive people aren't better than people who are looking at the darkness. Right? And so, the naive people think, oh, well, everyone should be naive in these little boxes and all protected. And, the people who pop outside of that and engage a bit with the darker things, they think, well, you naive people, you're just naive. It's like, yeah, naive first, cynical second, wise third. You want to get through cynicism and darkness to wisdom as fast as you possibly can. And you should know that that's a place to go.
Right.
But,
just like you were saying a minute ago, it's like you need to know that there are places to go from where you are.
Yes,
there always are.
And they have to be real and not naive. Think, well, why should I be good? It's like, well, maybe you shouldn't if good is just naive. But, the really good people aren't naive. They're tough as they can possibly be, and they've seen things. And then they decide to become good.
It's steadfast. I mean, you have to, I'm realizing that I have to daily show up for myself if I want my life to be what I want it to be.
Right.
It is a battle. And not only that, but it's like you have to have some sort of a plan. When I used to be a little bit more aimless, I was just like, oh, I want things to be good. It wasn't enough.
No.
Because things don't know how to just be good.
This is true. All by left to themselves, things go from bad to worse.
Things will go out of town. Things will, yes, it's entropy.
Yeah, like leave your house alone for a year. Yeah. See what happens to it. It's like, it's way better. It's like, no, it's not. It has black mold everywhere, right? And a vandal has moved in. There's graffiti everywhere. And there's
squirrels drawing a pentagram. Like things have gotten out of hand.
Exactly. That's definitely not good when that happens.
Excuse this quick interruption. I got to tell you about bird dogs. Bird dogs are shorts, but they have underwear built into them. Think about that. Think about the fact that sometimes you wear shorts and underwear at the same time, and think about how crazy that is. Think about it. Think about running around with two pieces of clothing wrapped around your junk. That's a thing of the past, man. You could end up as a hitchhiker if you're behaving like that. You could end up in a mental health facility as a patient, or at least as an outpatient. There's no reason to still be wearing underwear inside of your shorts. You might as well just go live with the dinosaurs. So Bird Dogs has these new beautiful hitters right here. And with these, you can do anything you want in here. You can get inside of there with your whole body. Instead of wearing pants at the pool, now you can wear shorts at the pool like a regular gladiator. Bird dogs are the way to go. Nobody likes a guy who still wears underwear. That guy can't dance. That guy usually has matches on him. That guy has adult asthma, but he's lying about it. And he just says that he whistles a lot with his lungs. It's just so old style. It's just so old school. So go to birddogs.com and use promo code VON, V-O-N, and they'll throw in a free dad hat. Are you a dad or do you want to be? Well, now you got the hat for it. They say it's a $50 value for that hat. Go to birddogs.com. You will not take these things off, I promise. You can live in these and you can die in these. Birddogs.com, promo code VON. And now back to the episode with Mr. Jordan B. Peterson. I have one question, and we're going to get some questions from our listeners. So, like, I feel like it's like, I grew up in a poor white environment, and now I've been fortunate enough. I really look at it as fortunate to get out of that environment and be able to see what life is like, and almost from a different perspective, like we don't have the same problems, the same judgments and stuff here in Los Angeles as we did in Louisiana when I was growing up. It's just not part of the nature, But I see one of the biggest issues I notice, and it's very obvious to me, is just that people's perspectives of, especially in America, are so different. It's like, of course, here in Los Angeles, like, or in Beverly Hills, or you would never like want to have a gun, It just seems silly. It'd be like, where would you even put it? Like,
right.
It would make your pants look uncomfortable.
Right, it would, especially if they're tight. Yeah.
Which is most of the pants.
Exactly.
But where I'm from, like, you would certainly have a gun. You might not have it on you, but you would have one for safety. But it's just like, it's interesting how the two sides can't see how the other one would make sense,
Yeah.
This is a crazy perspective issue. And I start to wonder if in the future, through like virtual reality and stuff like that, do you think we'll ever have like an emotional virtual reality that can show us not only visually kind of what someone else's, and it doesn't have to be specifically about the gun thing, but what someone else's world is like?
We do have that to some degree. You get that in a movie. When you go and you see a character who's really different than you, or a work of fiction, that's actually why we use those technologies, is so that we can put ourselves in other people's places. And that does work. It is an effective technology, and it's hard to say to what degree virtual reality might augment that.
Right.
But we're very curious about such things, and you can be sure that if we could have a more real experience using virtual reality than we can with a movie, we'll definitely do it. Yeah. We're majorly into simulations of alternate realities. And it's partly because, well, look, you grew up in Louisiana and now you're here. So you've hit these different worlds, and that's expanded your perspective. It's made you more than you were.
Yes.
Well, immersing yourself in fiction is one way of having that happen, right? But the more you can do that, the better. And I think your comments on these cultural differences are absolutely right. I mean, the United States is an unbelievably diverse place. I mean, you guys have 300 million people here. That's a lot of people. And there are a lot of different cultural contexts, and there are different rules that go along with all of them. And the gun thing is really one of them. I mean, I come from this little town in northern Alberta. Most people there have a gun, or 10 or 100. Like, they have lots of guns, and they hunt. I grew up on wild meat. My dad hunts. He still hunts. He's 82. He's slowing down a little bit, obviously, because he's getting old. But
he's using a gun now instead of a knife.
Yeah,
he's out there.
But he doesn't just jump on the animal. Yeah. So yes, and people don't necessarily understand, unless they've been beat around a little bit, how different these different contexts are, and that there can be valid rules that apply in the different contexts. And it's best to live and let live, as far as I'm concerned. And I also don't think that only the state should be allowed to be dangerous, which is partly why I don't really like the restrictions. I mean, some reasonable restrictions on weapon ownership are obviously necessary. You don't get to have a Sherman tank unless you're a private collector. Probably you shouldn't have an atom bomb, something like that. Yeah. And so there's some cutoff to how heavily you should be armed.
Agreed.
But zero amount of dangerousness is the wrong amount of dangerousness for the autonomous citizen.
Yeah.
I think people should be encouraged, in some sense, to be as dangerous as they can be and still be civilized. That's a great motif. Well, I think for women and men.
Yeah.
For both. It's like, yeah, man, you should be dangerous. It's like, no, you should be nice. It's like, nice the distinction between nice and weak is very, very difficult to make. Now, if you're a horrible monster and you've got that developed and you can be civilized and decent, like more power to you. It's one thing I really like about Joe Rogan. You know, he's an absolute bloody monster. He's really, really, really tough.
Yeah.
And yet he's very truthful. He's very forthright. Like, and all that toughness is integrated into his character. And it makes him a formidable interviewer because you can tell, like, he won't budge.
No.
Not a bit. He's
Yeah.
also extraordinarily funny. So it's cool to see him. I think he really is a remarkable person. And I've watched lots of people.
He is.
He's like 4 standard deviations above the mean in tough. He's 4 standard deviations above the mean in smart, and he's 4 standard deviations above the mean in funny.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a guy, man.
He's
You
like,
know?
to me, he's like a poignant, and he's also a father of 3 girls,
Right,
which
right.
I
Which
think
is comical,
it's so comical.
Yeah, it is. Did you see his take on the Kardashians? Oh my God, it's in his last comedy special, and he talks about
Oh wait, yeah, no, I've seen that on stage.
God,
It's so
being
good.
dominated by women, which he is at the moment. It's so comical.
He's like a poignant teddy bear that joined the Marines. Kind of. That's how I think of him.
Right.
as.
Well, Jocko Willink is kind of like that too. And
I haven't met him
except
yet.
Jocko's about 6 inches thicker.
Is he
so,
really?
Oh man, he's a formidable looking guy.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. And he's like, discipline. Get
Yeah.
yourself the hell out of bed in the morning, you bloody weasels.
And you know what?
Put yourself together.
So much of that is even the things that I learned in AA is just getting going, like contrary action. Take the next right action, whatever it is, no matter
That's
how
right.
I feel, even if I feel like I'm a piece of shit or I'm not worth something or that nobody loves me or that nobody ever loved me.
Yeah.
Like
all
no matter
true,
what.
All true.
Which
You're
all
worthless.
yes.
No one loves you. Yeah, probably true.
But get up and and make my fucking bed, and because then once I do that, I'm going to go to the next thing, and then suddenly I'm in the living room, and I maybe there's an egg grilling in the other room, and I'm suddenly in control of my life, and my feelings and my negative thoughts aren't in control anymore.
Take the best next step that you can manage to take.
Yeah.
That's a great rule, man, and that's the right path, eh? And the question, well, if you're
Because it's forward.
forward,
It's a forward path.
towards something worthwhile. That's where you want to be. You want to be moving forward towards something worthwhile. You don't even necessarily want to be where it's worthwhile, although that would be all right. And maybe now and then you get there, and then you're happy. But mostly, what you want to be is moving forward to something worthwhile, which also indicates why you need to specify something worthwhile. Think, well, what's worthwhile? That's up to you. What will get you out of bed in the morning on a miserable day? What would be worthwhile? And one of the things I've been talking to my audiences about a lot when they're responding to this great, and I think this is a really important thing to know. Almost everything that you do that will be meaningful will involve the adoption of responsibility, interestingly enough, because people think, well, vacation, impulsive pleasure, cocaine, alcohol, hedonism, essentially, that's what makes life worthwhile. It's like, no, that's not right. Like there's a place for hedonic pleasure, man, for sure. Although you got to be careful of it. Because it's a trap, right? Well, alcohol and cocaine, a very good
Oh, even
example
if
of
I
that.
stay up and have 2 pieces of key lime pie, I feel like I've gone to Dante's seventh circle. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I feel you there. But there is a place and time.
Yeah, well, but most of the time, what gets you out of bed is the fact that you're doing something that's worthwhile. You're taking care of yourself a little bit, at least, moving yourself forward, and maybe you're moving your family forward, doing something for someone else at least, and maybe if you really got your act together, you're doing something for the community.
Right.
And so you need a meaning to set against the tragedy of existence and the malevolence of existence, for that matter. And the meaning is mostly to be found in the adoption of responsibility. And so that's so interesting because it's not obvious.
Right.
It's
It
like,
doesn't seem like it. Oh, I take on more. I'm already overwhelmed. But you're not overwhelmed. You're just stagnant. You're just stuck. And or maybe that's not it. You're not just stagnant, but you can do it. And the reward is going to be there. You just might not see it. It doesn't feel that way.
Well, it'll feel that way a little bit at 3 a.m. You think, well, what did I do to justify my wretched existence? You can say, well, at least I got out of bed and I cleaned my room a little bit, and maybe I did something for my daughter.
Yeah.
Not a complete waste of space.
Right.
And no one can live with that kind of shame and guilt. It just takes you out.
And that's what takes you into other things like
Yes,
drugs and alcohol.
God, that's for sure.
Excuses, because then you feel a little bit more justified. It gives you like, oh, well, I'm not just a bad parent. I have an addiction, or I have this, or
And you can use it as a temporary escape,
100%.
Yeah. And sometimes people also, they're genuinely depressed or they're genuinely anxious, and the medication actually does help. And that's also, positive and negative. Negative insofar as it produces a trap.
And why are so many men aimless right now? Why are so many men right now
It's partly because they're actually not encouraged. Like, I'm stunned, and I think this is partly...
parents can't parent anymore.
Well,
it's
there's
like
that.
You know, it's like I heard you and Joe talking about like nobody, the baseball games are all, the softball games everybody wins.
Yeah.
But then a parent doesn't.
That's a stupid game where everybody wins.
But here's
because you can't win if everybody wins.
Right.
No one won.
No one won. But also, no parent gets to have the conversation like, "Oh, you lost, and this is okay," or no parent gets to have that conversation like, "Oh, you won. Don't be a sore winner."
Yeah. Well, the conversation is, "Oh, you lost." But that doesn't mean you're a loser.
Right.
Right. That's the important conversation.
But that conversation's not even happening
now.
If
you don't have the opportunity to lose.
Right. So there's no reprimanding from the parents. There's no connection there with like, if everybody's a winner, then there's no, you don't need your parent to, move you back into a comfortable space, when you get off.
Yeah, well, you don't get to tell your son, oh, hell, what's a loss to a great kid like you?
Yeah.
It's like,
and
you can
it's
handle
something
that,
like
man.
that.
Next game, go for it.
Yeah. There's no like you put your arm around your son's neck after he's lost, and he feels that.
You say, good game, man.
Yeah.
Good game.
And that,
or you say, look, that looked a little rough. Anything you think you could do better next time?
Yeah. What can we do?
What can we do better next time?
Yeah, let's get out. We'll try it tomorrow.
Yeah.
But that kind of stuff, those moments, I feel like are the moments that build, especially young men, and live inside of them forever. Yeah, well,
so one of the things that I find quite painful is all these people that I'm encountering. And I think it's more true for young men, because I think young women are getting more encouragement from society, all things considered. And maybe not, maybe that's not right, but it doesn't matter. It's still the case that lots of young men come and talk to me, and it's obvious that no one has ever encouraged them.
Yeah.
And I mean encouraged technically. No one has attempted to instill courage into them.
Yes.
And to say, look, man, you're worthwhile. You're worthwhile. No. There's something in you that could develop into something great. That's sort of like the right definition of worthwhile. It's not like you're okay the way you are. It's like, no, you're not.
Right.
What? And why would I ever say that? Because okay, you're just fine. Well, great. You might as well just like take Ambien and become unconscious because you got nothing else to do.
Yeah.
It's like, no, there's plenty for you to do to put yourself together. But you're the sort of person who could do it. You could put yourself together. You could be more than you are, and you should be. Because otherwise the world degenerates into hell, which is exactly what happens. It's like, and it's so sad in some sense for me to see how little encouragement people actually need, because there's lots of people coming to talk to me and they say, well, I haven't had a father, or there was no male influence in my life, or no one's ever, well, that's basically it. They haven't had that kind of encouraging influence. And so no one's ever said these things to them. And so someone says something to them and they go, oh, really? That's the possibility? And then they go out and like fix things. It didn't take much. No, it didn't take much.
Now, do you feel like there's special gifts you have? Because I was thinking about this. I was like, well, why does Jordan get through to people? Like, and for one, I was thinking like your voice. You have a, like, if you don't know you, if you've never seen a picture of you, you could be 27 or 140. I feel like you have a timeless voice. That's what I mean more. You have a voice I feel like that I could have heard in 1810, or a voice that I could hear 30 years from now. Like it's almost like it doesn't fit in. So it's almost, you can reach so many more if the sound wave is like a wave that everybody can adapt to. Do you feel anything like that, or is that just?
I think it's an interesting observation. I mean,
you have this Norman Rockwell-y type of. That's how it comes into. This is me speaking, just me. But I'm noticing the way it affects other men like me.
Yeah, well, people have said that, that I've got this kind of old-fashioned appearance in a sense. I don't mean just my voice, but just...
Yeah, like you just came on a train and the train just came out of nowhere. And you're like, oh, this guy's selling some, this is some beautiful snake oil.
Snake oil, yeah. Well, that's the other thing that people say too. It's like, oh, a snake oil salesman. It's like, well, no, not exactly.
No, this is practical.
Responsibility is not snake oil.
Agreed. Snake oil, I think.
It's the opposite of it.
It's the opposite.
It's like, yeah, you've got problems. It's because you have things to do.
Yeah.
It's funny because I've been, talking to young men too. It's about the ones that get all resentful about being rejected by women. It's like, are all the women are rejecting you, eh? It's like, yeah, those goddamn women. It's like, no. If all the women are rejecting you, it's not the women, buddy.
That's you. You got to figure something out. You've got some work
to do.
Yeah.
If it's all of them, you're getting voted down pretty heavy there. And you might think, well, that's crushing. It's like, yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
But the positive end of the message is there's lots of things you could do to fix it. And you could start small and it would fix it and it will work.
Yeah.
So you think, no, it's hopeless. It's like, no, it's not. It's not hopeless.
Things aren't hopeless.
Yeah, that's right. Things aren't hopeless. Well, they certainly aren't hopeless if you can see things you're doing that are making things worse. Sit down, take stock of your life. You think, okay, what am I doing to make things worse? You have to ask yourself that question. Like,
And you have to ask, and you have to write the answers down.
Yes, that would be good. You also have to want the answers, and you won't, because the answers are going to hurt, right? Because they are the things you're doing to make things worse. What am I doing to make myself weaker and stupider than I have to be? Sit on the edge of your bed. That's like a prayer. If you want to have a prayer, there's one. Why am I weak and stupid? Man, you'll get lots of answers to that question. It's like, well, that's so hopeless. It's like, no. If you go to buy a house and you don't have very much money, you buy a wreck of a house. And you don't pretend that the house is any better than it is.
Right.
Not unless you're willfully blind looking for trouble. You think, no, this place... A, it's all I can afford, and B, well, I can fix it.
Right.
Well, you can. You can fix it.
You can fix
but
it.
not unless you know where everything's broken. So you think, well, why am I taking stock of where everything's broken? There's nothing I can do about it. It's like, aim lower. There's something you could fix.
Right.
There's something about you could fix today. You think, well, that's so trivial, it's not worth doing. It's like, no, if it's moving you ahead a little bit, you'll be slightly better tomorrow than you were today, and then maybe you can chew off a little bigger chunk.
Yeah.
And you'll be a little tiny bit better the next day, and then you can chew off a bigger chunk, and that'll speed you along like nobody's business.
And other things, the little chunks that you chew, they're going to magnify quickly by creating other responsibilities you won't even notice you're doing. Like an example would be, say if there's something in your place, a cupboard or something that's covered with newspapers or junk or whatever, you move it off, you put a plant there, right? So now you've cleaned off your cupboard, you have a plant. Now the plant's going to need water each day. So next thing you know, now you're taking care of something each day. It's like, it's interesting how quickly the things multiply.
Absolutely. Well, that's why, it's so funny too, because I've been telling people to clean up their room. It's like, God, it's not like everybody hasn't heard that 50,000 times, but it's become this meme. But the reason for that is because I tried to explain to people, to everyone, including me, why it's important to clean up your room. It's like, hey, man, you have a room.
Yeah.
It's like, most people throughout human history have not had a room. You have a room. Well, my room's a hellhole. It's like, well, then you're a denizen of hell inhabiting it. You should do something about that. Well, what? Well, put it in minimal order. Get your clothes together, because you have to wear those, and that's how people are looking at your clothes. So get your clothes in order. What clothes should you be wearing? Not the clothes of a total wretched loser. How about that?
Tasmanian devils or stuff like that.
Well, right, exactly. Well, and what about your bed? Well, is it comfortable? Do you make it in the morning so it looks like half civilized? Can you sleep there? It's like, is there junk everywhere so you just hate your life when you walk into your room? It's like, clean the damn thing up. See if you can do it. Order your drawers. Learn to fold your clothes. You could probably learn that. Put it in minimal order. And then, man, you could get spectacular. Well, you said, put a plant in there. It's like, a plant? Well, then you have to learn how plants work, and then you have to water the damn thing. But then there's something living in your room. You might hope, my room is the sort of place where something could hypothetically live.
Like me.
Yeah, like you. Yeah, exactly.
And then you might actually start to live.
Well, you might. If you set the stage for it, you might start to play the part. And then you think,
wow, that's it.
Maybe I could make it beautiful. It's like, then not only would you have a room, if you want to get opposition from people around you who aren't happy about you trying to improve things, cleaning might not do it, although it might, because people think, well, who the hell do you think you are cleaning up your room? It's like, because are you better than me? It's like, well, maybe.
Maybe for a second, maybe you think you are.
Maybe, man, maybe, if you're, maybe that's your brother, your older brother, or your father, he's all covered with Cheetos dust and his guts hanging out and he's watching TV, smoking a cigarette and thinking, oh, you think you're better than me, eh? It's like, well, it's not actually
maybe
that
not
hard.
Today.
Yeah.
Maybe not today, but
so
maybe in a week.
There's going to be resistance. But that'll be nothing like the resistance you'll get if you try to start making your room beautiful. Man, that'll produce resistance, because beauty is absolutely terrifying to people, because beauty highlights what's ugly. And so if you start to make your room beautiful, then everything around that isn't like that just starts to glow, in the worst sense.
So is that dangerous then, to beautify things?
It's terribly dangerous. That's why people are afraid of beauty, but it's the greatest thing you can do. because it puts you in alignment with, like, beautiful things are beautiful for a reason.
Right.
That beauty has depth, like it's real depth, man. That's what gets you in touch with the transcendent and the divine is beauty. You introduce that into your room, you're playing with fire, and people will resist it. And so you can think, well, first of all, I'll make my room Spartan and clean and neat, sort of like military level discipline, like clean. It's like, okay, now you got it cleaned up. And then you think, my clothes are in order, I got it cleaned up. Well, now maybe I'll do something that'll make it beautiful. Well, then you have to learn what beauty is too, and that's really hard. Like and that'll be scary.
And that's going to be scary because especially if you're a dude, you can't, you know.
Well, you're also going to think, well, what the hell do I know? I have terrible taste, which is undoubtedly true.
Yeah.
So do your best, get a print of something. Get a print of a great painting, put it on your room. It's like you think, oh, I don't know what the hell that thing's doing there. It's like, look out, man, that thing's got power. So look, think about it. I was in this museum a while back in New York, and it was, I don't remember which museum it was in, but it was full of these paintings from the late Renaissance. And so there was like a dozen of them in this one room. And like by people like Michelangelo and Da Vinci.
Rodin, stuff like that?
Well, no? Rodin would be later, but the same caliber of artists, same caliber. And so I was in that room, and it's like every painting on that wall was worth $300 million, like minimum. You couldn't buy those paintings, like they're priceless. But if they ever went for market, that's about what they'd be worth. And there was like a dozen of them in there. I thought, wow, there's like $3.6 billion worth of paintings in this room. And then there's people all over the world, they're coming to look at these paintings. And you think, okay, look, here we are. We're in the richest city in the world, prime real estate, in this unbelievably expensive museum, in this sealed room. The paintings are worth $3.6 billion, and people are making pilgrimages from all over the world just to look at them. It's like, what the hell's going on? It's like, yeah, no kidding. What the hell's going on? There's beauty in those paintings. There's beauty, and it's magnificent. And part of what it does is say, you aren't who you should be. That's what beauty does to you. It's like you aren't, that's why you're intimidated by a beautiful woman, a staggeringly beautiful woman. It's like, oh my God, attracted for sure, but definitely intimidated. It's like, well, that's because you aren't who you could be. Beauty does that to you. Because
I'm not who I could be?
Yeah, well, because beauty has that contrast. It's like...
wow, if they're that beautiful, then suddenly look what I am. Look who I am. Oh.
Yeah. That's when you need a drink.
Yeah.
Or like 10 of them.
That's when you need, that's when you need that's when you need a relapse.
That's right, exactly.
Let's get into a couple of questions that we had from some callers, if you don't mind, Jordan. Sure. Thank you so much, man.
This will be a familiar voice to our listeners.
Hey, Theo, and hoping Dr. Peterson as well. This is Trick Lung Mickey, and I had a question to you both about self-awareness. It's an aspect of life that I'm a pretty big advocate for, and I find that more often than not, people are acting without a strong conscious thought before a lot of their actions. And so I'd like to hear your guys' insight on how to breach this subject to a loved one tactfully. What's a way, Dr. Peterson, that I could maybe assist in a loved one's, their growth in this manner without seemingly being arrogant or holier than thou as well?
That's good.
Oh, that's a hard question.
Both of you guys' thoughts on this.
And Mickey's a guy, he just got a lung transplant. He's kind of like been a mascot of the podcast over the past year. He had cystic fibrosis, and he's got a couple of new airbags. So he's, that's the best I've ever heard him talk. So he's using them.
Oh, good. Well, Jesus, that's a hell of a thing.
But that's a big question. Yeah, if you have some, like people are moving without thought now. It's like if you have information just on your phone, it means you have it inside of your head. And then people are making... people are moving or just...
Well, you obviously have a specific example in mind. And so imagine that you're interacting with someone who is wandering down a kind of blind path and you want to broach it. And so the first issue is you kind of got to get the moral superiority out of your own tone, right? Because you're not lording it over them, because that's not going to go very well.
Right.
And then maybe you need to collect a few examples, so before you say confront the person or have the discussion, you could say, well, look, I noticed this and it didn't go very well and I didn't say anything about it. And then I noticed this, which was another example of the same thing, and I still didn't say anything about it. And then I noticed this, and it was the third thing, and like all three of those things happened and they didn't have very good consequences. And I'm kind of wondering, what do you think about that? Like, do you think that's working out for you? Is there something that might be done about it? Am I just being stupid here? And it's good to have a genuine question about it. And so sometimes you can, and you want to make it also, the other thing is you want to make it about as little as possible because you don't want to just wallop the person.
Yeah.
You want to tap them on the side of the head. You don't want to hit them with a sledgehammer. And so if you're trying to initiate a productive dialogue, you got to have your evidence in order, and you have to make that conversation about something small enough so it isn't going to destroy the person to confront. Something like that.
Right. Yeah, if you go too hard on somebody, it's going to be ineffective.
Oh, and they're just going to fight.
Yeah.
They're going to say, to hell with you, you're just a son of a bitch. Or maybe they'll burst into tears and they'll get angry, or they'll stop the conversation. Or,
and even fold yourself into it if you can.
well, that would be good.
Yeah.
You can say, well, here's how I'm contributing to the idiocy,
Yeah.
which is really useful if you're dealing with someone like your wife or a close, intimate partner.
Yeah.
It's like, I notice we're in this pathway. This has happened 2 or 3 times. Here's how I think I'm contributing.
Right.
And that has to be real.
Yeah, take your own, show your own, because we all have a part in it. You have a part in everything. So show what your part is.
Yes. Well, and then you can also, if you actually discover what your part is, then you can maybe stop playing that part. Like if I've learned that if I'm embroiled in a dispute with my wife, and there's reasons for disputes. You have complicated problems to solve, and you're different. So that's why there are disputes, apart from your own stupidity and malevolence and all of that. But there are real reasons to have disputes. So maybe you're in a dispute and you can't get out of it, and you're trying to show you're right, and it's not going anywhere. And you think, okay, we better break apart because it's going sideways. If you go into a room and you sit again on the edge of your bed or a chair and you think, okay, probably I've done something stupid to contribute to this in some way. What might it have been? And if you ask like you want the answer, you'll get the answer. And it won't be an answer you like, and it won't be something you like to admit. You might think, well, it's only 5% my fault still. It's like, yeah, okay, but at least it's 5%. Then you can go back to your wife and you could say, here's the stupid thing I've done to contribute to this. And I figured it out, and I'll try not to do it again. And, sorry, I'm so dumb.
Yeah.
And maybe if she's done the same thing, she can tell you the same thing. And then maybe now you're both like humbled a bit in the proper way. You can actually have a discussion that's aimed at solving the problem instead of attaining victory.
Yeah. Why do we have to be right? Like I don't have to be, I hope to not have to be right a lot of times. I'm happy to be wrong. Like there's this thing out there these days that everyone, they just have to be right. There's no discussion anymore.
Better to learn something than to be right, unless you're already right enough. And if you think you're right enough, well, look, if your life is perfect and everything's exactly the way you want it to be, you're right enough, man. Good for you. But
Yeah.
I haven't met anybody like that yet.
And especially when you are commingling with others, that's when you have to, sometimes you have to not be right just for everybody to be okay.
One thing that's worth thinking about, and I outlined this a fair bit in this book, 12 Rules for Life, is like, do you want to make friends with what you know, or do you want to make friends with what you don't know? And so because it's a good question. It's like, well, what I know, that's all secure, and it's
easy. That's safe.
It's easy, and it's fortified, and it's worked. It's like, yeah, fine, but it's insufficient, or unless everything's perfect, which it isn't. So it's insufficient. It's like, okay, well, if you make friends with what you don't know, and then you have a discussion with someone, and they tell you something you don't know, then you have the opportunity to be a little bit smarter. And if you're trying to avoid hell, let's say, it's useful to be a little bit smarter, a little wiser. And so even if you're having an acrimonious argument with someone, maybe you can sift a little bit of wheat from the chaff, and you can think, yeah, well, most of what you're saying, it's nonsense. But that one point you made there, it's like, that's a point. You made a point. It pointed me somewhere, maybe somewhere slightly more valuable. I learned something. It's also why it's so useful to talk to people that don't agree with you. It's like, of course they're wrong. They don't agree with you. But, well, but maybe you're wrong about something. And so...
Right. People want to feel just appreciated, even if you don't agree with them. Sometimes it's at least appreciating that they are presenting...
You're just listening.
Yes.
Well, Carl Rogers had he's a psychotherapist. He had a real useful piece of advice about that. It's one of the rare pieces of advice that I think actually work in psychotherapy, because mostly that's about helping people discover what they need to do. They have to discover it. You facilitate that.
Right.
But Roger said, look, if you're having an argument with someone, and this really works if it's someone close to you, it's like you're having this bitter argument. It's like, here's the rule. You have your say, then I am going to say what you told me. But you have to agree that I got it right. Right. And then the reverse. I get to have my piece, and then you get to say what I said. You don't have to agree. That's not the point. but you have to formulate my argument back to me in a manner that I agree with. And so you're going to reduce it to the gist. It means you're not going to treat me like an imbecile or a straw man.
Right.
And one of the things Rogers pointed out is if you do that, the arguments tend to become productive. So that's a lovely technique. It really does work.
Because immediately you're recognizing what they're saying.
You're at least you're at least listening. And the thing too is if you listen to someone, sometimes if you listen to someone, they discover the limits of their own argument. They think, so they lay it out and they think, well, I'm really not as mad about that as I thought, or, that isn't exactly what I meant, or maybe there's something else going on here that I didn't understand. Like if you let them lay out the whole thing and you just shut up while they stumble around, then sometimes they stumble somewhere slightly more productive, and that's also useful. That's also, I think this is something that happens between men and women a lot. So a woman will be upset about something, and she'll come and tell her husband about it, and he'll try to solve the problem. It's like, wait a second. Now, and you think, well, the problem needs to be solved, so why isn't that okay for her? And the answer is, she hasn't fully formulated the problem. So you have to wait while she stumbles around. Not that women do that any more than men. That's not my point. Well, she stumbles around and says, well, here's why I think I'm upset. Here's one possibility. Here's another possibility. Here's another possibility. You might have to listen to 10 possibilities before the actual problem emerges. Because it's not like people always know why they're upset.
Right. Sometimes they're, especially if they're just upset at the moment.
Yeah. And then maybe something triggered it at work yesterday. And they their boss said something rude and they've been kind of stewing on that all day and that's made them irritable. And then they snap at something trivial. You think, well, what the hell's wrong with you? The person says, well, here's what it is. And you listen and you think, well, and then they stumble around and they think, there's something else that's still bothering me. And like it takes a bunch of digging to get to the bottom. So you have to shut up and let that happen. And then maybe you can think, okay, how can we solve this problem? But if you jump in there too early, you circumvent the process of exploration. You can't solve a problem unless you formulate it properly.
And that's one of the things that I think is so rough these days in our, especially in the U.S., I find, especially like in the mainstream, it's like there's no discussion. There's just like...
Yeah, well, these long-form conversations are
changing that.
They're changing that, and maybe pretty fast, too.
Yeah, look, I'm so fascinated. There were times when I'm like, damn, am I ever going to be able to have any sort of career in this world that I want to have a career in? And then... but then I see like a lot of like these, regular television shows. People just don't, but there's no authenticity in them anymore. Because I'd rather watch somebody be wrong, at least if they're trying to be.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's good because that's life, right? people being wrong while they're trying to be. That's life. So if you don't find that engaging, there's real trouble to be had.
And it just shuts people down. It's like, if I can't, there's so many accusations of racism and stuff these days. Now, say if I feel like there's racism in me, right? Somewhere inside of me. Yeah. And whether it was, who knows where I could have learned it from. Yep. Who knows if some of it is justifiable in the sense that a race was violent towards me or did something towards me that made me, or someone of a race did something. Yep. But it's like if it's like there's these people today that just want me to sign a piece of paper that would be like, at one time I was racist, or I promise I'll never be racist. Yep. But whatever that is, it doesn't help me solve whatever. It doesn't help me get to whatever. If there is any discomfort in me about race, even about my own race, it doesn't help me get to that.
Well, if you don't let people be wrong and stupid, you can't let them be at all. Yeah. And that's actually a huge part of the reason for free speech. It's like we have to stumble around like morons to stumble upon the truth. Yeah. We're going to say stupid things. We're going to say wrong things.
Yeah, that's why it wasn't costly speech. Because if we needed to make it free because we were going to fuck it up so much. Yeah. Like it was like, it's got to be free. Right. Because we're going to use so much of it to figure out where we're going.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's right. If there was a cost,
if it would be way too high. It'd be way too high.
Good point, man. That's a nice way of thinking about it.
But yeah, I and that's one thing that you have a gift, and I don't know if it's a learned one or if you feel like it's just something from, a higher power, or that you're a conduit for this, that you don't sound too much. You sound like a know-it-some, but you don't sound like a know-it-all.
I always include myself in the audience that I'm speaking to.
Right.
It's like,
maybe
it isn't that you need improvement. It's that we need improvement. Yeah, and I'm in there, man. I'm in the group of people who could use some radical improvement.
And you believe that, though.
Definitely. Yeah. Absolutely. Look, I mean, Yeah.
So do I. Like, sometimes I'm just talking just because I'm hoping somewhere in all of it I'll help myself. You know, or that when someone calls that, you know, like it's crazy how many callers call in with thoughts and feelings and stuff like that, and it shows me something that I never knew. And you might get that probably in questions that people ask you, or
look, I mean, I'm not as tough as I could be. I'm not as smart as I could be. I'm not as musically gifted as I could be. Like, I haven't read as much as I could read. I don't know enough about history. Like, there's endless numbers of things that I could be doing better.
Right.
Yeah, well, I'd like to do them better, but they're endless. So I'm trying to keep my eyes open and figure out, okay, what can I do better? And the world would be a better place if I was a better person. So I'm going to try to be a better person. And so I'm trying to figure that out because it's important. And I'm in the conversation, man.
Yeah.
So, and I think the people that are engaging to talk to, often in these long form discussions, it's the same thing. Is they're in the audience of people who need to be improved.
Yeah.
Right? So at least when the dialogue is going well, you know. And so when I hear like the last caller and he comes up with a question like that, it's like, yeah, that's a real question, man. That's like something to grapple with. So
I like that. I like that, man. Yeah.
Hey, Theo, this is Tyler. I live in Tennessee. I had a question for Jordan Peterson. Jordan, when you look back on your life when you're older, what do you think your most important contribution will be? And I don't mean just things that you have done, but things you may plan on doing. And I really appreciate you doing this hotline and having me on. So thanks, guys. And thank you, Jordan. Bye.
Well, I think establishing this link between responsibility and meaning is a good thing, and I've outlined that a fair bit in the first book I wrote, which was Maps of Meaning. The audio version of that is available now, by the way, and it's a very hard book, but I think the audio version is comprehensible. So if you like 12 Rules for Life, and you want to dig deeper, that's a good place to dig.
And the test I took last night will help as well.
Oh yeah, that's another thing we didn't talk about. I have this test online called understandmyself.com, which I would recommend. It'll give you a description of your personality according to a big 5 model: extroversion, neuroticism, which is sensitivity to negative emotion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness. And then it breaks each of those down into 2 sub-traits. And so I would say it's really useful for you to do that, find out where your strengths and weaknesses are, what your character is, but it's also really useful to have the people around you do it, because you'll find out there are things about them you don't know. And things you like one of the things with my father, could never understand my father because it was hard to get him to be kind of, what would you say, enthusiastic about adventures, something like that. He wasn't an enthusiastic person.
Right, he wasn't outgoing?
Well, he was in a sense. Well, he did the test anyways. And extroversion splits into assertiveness and enthusiasm. He's really low in enthusiasm, but he's high in assertiveness.
Right, he's assertive.
I see. He's assertive. He can put himself forward. He's forthright in his speech. He's a hard worker.
He likes to hunt.
But he's not a giggly, enthusiastic person. It's just not in his temperament. I thought, oh, that's interesting. So that was really useful.
Do you feel like you turned into that same way or no?
No, I'm enthusiastic. Yeah,
you are enthusiastic.
Yeah, I'm quite enthusiastic.
And I was watching
more like my mother in that regard, I would say. So,
do you find, is it neat to be like your mother a little bit?
Oh, my mother's a really good person. Like the thing I really liked about my mother, one thing is that I could always make her laugh. So we shared that, and so she thought I had a good sense of humor, and I used it a lot around her, and so that was really good. But she was also 100% behind me, which was great. And my mother's a nice person, she's an agreeable person. She's a caring person, but she's got a spine, man. And she didn't mollycoddle her kids. Oh yeah, she's also a very hard worker. So she had that right. Like she would take care of us, and she was on our side, but she threw us out in the world, and she didn't interfere. So and I could see that was hard for her.
That's one of your steps in your book, isn't it? That there has to be a little bit of danger when kids play.
Oh, definitely.
What is it, 12th step, I think? Or?
Yeah. Oh, don't bother children when they're skateboarding.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Because if you're going to make your kids tough, which they better be if they're going to survive in the world, then you can't interfere when they're doing dangerous things carefully. And maybe not even that carefully. Right.
But still, even in that, to think about it that specifically, dangerous things carefully. That's such a place where kids learn.
Oh, that is the only place they learn. That's where everyone learns everything. When you're doing dangerous things carefully, man, that's where you learn. And so you interfere with that. You interfere with the process by which your children expand their competence. And it takes courage not to interfere with that. When you see your 3-year-old daughter climbing up the monkey bars, our daughter used to do that in our backyard, and she was 3 and the monkey bars were about 8 feet high. She liked to go right to the top and climb across them. It's like we're watching out the back window thinking, but what do? We went around out there, be careful.
Yeah.
Right, which is the thing. There's a bit of malevolence in that. Oh, my daughter's worrying me. Well, I'll go out there and take care of her, but I'll startle her. Then she'll fall. Well, that'll fix her. She won't do that again. She won't make me nervous. It's like, you got to watch those things, man.
Right. It's not about them. It's about you.
Yes, that's for sure. That's what you got to ask yourself. Am I taking care of my child, or am I just afraid to be afraid for them? There's no excuse for that.
You talked a minute ago about your mother laughing, and it's so funny. I thought since I got in I realized my mother and I never laughed when I was a kid, and I just realized that once I got into AA, like a lot of things, I started to have a lot more emotions and thoughts and feelings, and just be able to look at my life instead of being so stressed out about my current whatever. I was able to let this subside and whatever was in front of me, so I could see forward and backward a little bit, and even just see into like moments that I'd had with family. But it's just so fascinating. When you said that, I was like, oh man, that was such a thing that I realized recently. I never got to laugh with my mother.
That's too bad, because you're funny.
Yeah.
So that would have been great. And
I think I realized, and sorry to interrupt you,
no problem.
I think one of the reasons why I ended up getting into being funny, even against probably my own will, was all I wanted to do was probably make my mother laugh, And the fact, so I had to make everybody, I don't know if I was afraid to, or but I never realized it until probably about a year and a half ago. I'm like, man, my mother and I have never laughed together. And I'm like, that's so...
sad.
It's sad.
Yeah, it's sad. It's too bad. How come?
I don't know. I think
you have to tickle her the next time you see her.
She was a hard worker. You know what?
Yeah.
There are little things I start to have little plans when I'm talking to her on the phone.
Yeah.
I'll make like a goofy voice or something just to see, because we've never done that.
Yeah.
To think that my mother's never heard me be goofy, or that I've never heard her step out of, whatever, laughter zones or something that we built or something. It's just...
Well, it might be interesting to see if you could make an inroad there now that you've realized today.
But it's so powerful, and if there's people out there that have children and they're not having that experience, it's just such a... It lets a kid know that everything is kind of okay.
Yeah, well, that's a big purpose of humor, man. Well, there's a sticker on the computer over there, funny or die. It's like, yeah, no kidding. It's partly why I took Dave Rubin along with me on the tour.
Oh, yeah.
Well, a little bit of humor is it's not a good thing. It's bloody necessary.
Who makes you laugh? I mean, obviously, you just mentioned Dave, but who makes you laugh? Is there a comedian over time?
Mitch Hedberg.
Oh, yeah, huh?
Oh, yeah, man. King of the one-liners.
He's a Canadian aphrodisiac, isn't he, Mitch Hedberg?
Yeah, he's damn funny. And so I like stand-up comedians in general. I liked, who's the guy that just got in trouble in New York?
Louis C.K.?
Louis C.K.
Yeah.
Louis C.K. It's like, oh God, you really going to say that? Yes. Oh, that's so funny.
He's so deviant, kind of.
Yeah. I like Louis C.K. a lot. I think he's really funny.
Canada has a lot of great comedians.
Yes, certainly.
Harlan Williams, Howie Mandel, those are two friends of mine, and those are funny men.
Oh yeah, there's lots. Canadians can really produce comedians. Got to keep ourselves entertained when it's 200 below.
That's true. Somebody better be funny.
The other thing that I think that I've done that's very much worthwhile.
To get back to Tyler's question. Sorry.
I did a series of biblical lectures last year, and those were very much worthwhile, and they've got a lot of attention on the web, and I'm definitely going to continue doing that. So I'm starting to lecture about Exodus in November, and I want to walk through the whole corpus of biblical stories and look at them from a psychological perspective. So I'm hoping that will be important, because those are foundational stories, and if your foundational stories are ignored, then the foundation shifts and the whole thing falls, and that's not good. So
and that goes back to even what I think a lot of men are connecting with you, even that there's a foundation or something that it somehow is missing.
There is.
And
yes, definitely. I'm trying to put that foundation back, and the foundation is in those stories.
Yeah.
And part of those stories is about the fact that, the world is a battleground of good and evil. And
how exciting is it that it is?
Exactly.
It's so much more exciting. And I find faith to be so much more exciting. Like so what? What if I'm wrong and there's nothing? I'd rather take a chance.
Yeah.
I'd rather take a chance and have some sort of a relationship with a higher power,
Well, you can also,
as opposed to being alone.
Well, you can
nothing
also
feels worse than being
discover it.
alone.
It's like, look, are there things that you do that are meaningful and things that are not? It's like, yes, clearly. It's easier to find the things that aren't meaningful, but there are things you do that are more meaningful. It's like, okay, how meaningful can meaningful get? Well, it can get really meaningful. Like, there's no limit to the depths of meaning. I mean, that's partly what people discover if they play with psychedelics.
Yeah.
It's like, there's a bottomless pit.
Oh, you can go to another universe. I remember at one point in my head, it was like, knock, knock, who's there? Us. And I was like, who's inside of me? Like suddenly there was more than one voice in my head. And psychedelic, like it was like awakening a twin or something. It's immense. It's immense, the levels that I'm learning you can go to with love, and in my life right now, a lot of it is love and acceptance. But I'm guessing that with faith, it's probably things can get really deep.
Just the observation is that some things are more meaningful than others. It's like, okay, fine. Then what's the ultimately meaningful thing? That's a religious pursuit. I want to pursue the ultimately meaningful thing. It's like there are successive approximations to that, just as it's obvious that there are some things that are more worth pursuing than others. It's like, well, are there? Well, there better be then, because otherwise why pursue anything? If one thing isn't worth pursuing more than another, then how do you make choices between what you pursue? Well, you obviously make choices. So you rank order value. Well, what's the ultimate value? That's the religious question. Is there an ultimate value? It's like, well, who knows? But you can successively approximate it.
Yeah.
And you say, well, what are the markers for it? Love is one. Beauty is one. Truth is one. Nobility of character, that's another. Those things are real, and they're more real than their antagonists.
Yes.
So I think good is more powerful than evil, and I say that lightly, man. I studied evil for like 30 years.
Yeah, man, you're like you've been in the dark arts, man.
Yeah, well, that and the clinical practice, so I've looked at the darkest things I could find, and some of them I barely recovered from.
And you still believe that good
I believe more. I believe more than I did before. I believe that our capacity to transcend evil is far more powerful than evil, even though evil is no bloody joke. Well, that gave us World War II. It gave us the Gulag Archipelago and the horrors of the Soviet Union and communist China and Cambodia. And it's like the horrible tortures that went along with that, the mass slaughter, the malevolence and the lies, all of that. It's like, yeah, man, that's dark. The light is brighter than the dark is dark.
Wow.
And that's something, man, because the dark is plenty dark. So,
and this is a man, I mean, you're like the you're like Neil Armstrong of the dark moon, Yeah, you've been out there.
Well, it's interesting too to talk to these audiences, because when I talk with them, because I make a case. I say, look, it's no wonder that you're somewhat adrift and bitter about life. Life is really, really hard. Everyone dies. It's rough, man. And there's going to be, not only do you die, there's going to be a fair bit of catastrophe along the way. Yeah, and some of it really rough. And then it's even worse because you impose some of that on yourself because you're malevolent and stupid and you make other people's lives worse. It's like, Jesus, dismal, harsh. Despite that, there's more to you than that. You can get out of that. You can move away from it. You can fix it.
Man, I love that.
Yeah.
That's powerful, dude.
Yeah, well, that's the thing.
But see, I feel that when you say that, I feel like I'm not just even listening to you. Like I'm listening to you I feel like there are cells in my body that are traveling to this side of my body because they want to hear that.
Yes, right, absolutely.
People are longing to hear that. Even though life is painful, that it's worth living. Like we're in this thing now where it's like, especially my generation, like, is this even worth it? What's the point of all this? And you make, I think and I'm not trying to smoke your salmon or whatever the term is in Canada, but it's
definitely one we use.
Okay, good. Yeah, dude. All right. Yeah. Or, but it's like, yeah, you make me feel that's real.
I believe it. The light is stronger than the darkness. Yeah, but it's not just wishful thinking, and it surprised me. It surprised me.
Okay, so if it surprised you, do you feel then that you are a conduit for this sort of thing? And I'm not saying like you're a messenger but do you, because sometimes with my comedy, man, I don't write. People are like, you're so funny. I'm just a thing.
Yeah.
I'm a person. Yes, I have some, I have some game plan, but sometimes I just feel like I'm just a conduit. Like these aren't my ideas that I come up with, but you've done a ton of research. And so do you feel like...
Well, you kind of open the door to ideas. That's what you do if you're creative, but then you have to edit them and wrestle with them.
Right.
So there's some of that.
Okay.
There's some inspiration and some perspiration, as they say. The darkness issue, it did surprise me because like when I wrote Maps of Meaning, which as I said was my first book, I started writing that in 1985, and I picked the worst problem I could think of to solve, the worst thing, and it had to do with what happened in Auschwitz. There was something that happened in Auschwitz. It was a variety of this problem. So people were packed into cattle cars and shipped to Auschwitz, and that was rough, man. Like they were packed into the cattle cars. So if it was winter, the people around the edges froze to death, right? They froze. And if it was summer, the people in the middle died because they got too hot, right? It was horrible, right? It was horrible. And then they were taken to these concentration camps, right? And then the concentration camps, of course, had the gas chambers and the incineration
I've seen them.
chambers.
I've been to visit.
And
But yeah, I've seen them.
Right. And so one of the things the guards used to do is they'd take the prisoners off the cars, and it's not like they hadn't already been tortured quite nicely and were already headed for death. And so it's already pretty much as bad as it could get. But, oh no, that wasn't bad enough. So one of the tricks the guards used to play was they'd get the prisoners who could still more or less move to carry a sack of wet salt from one side of the compound to the other. It's like when you think, well, that's not so bad. It's like, yeah, it's bad. Those were the size of cities. This was a major journey, and it was a 100-pound sack of wet salt.
And especially when your pores are open, you're hurt, cuts open on your body.
But then they would have them carry it back. You see, and that's the little twist there. It's like, well, it's one thing if you're a guard and the damn salt needs to be moved, and you're just the slave owner whipping the whip. But at least the salt has to be moved. The wall has to be built. There's something in it. There's something in it. Carry that there and now carry it back. It's like, okay, so that wasn't the question I was trying to solve. The question is, what would I have to be like to do that and enjoy it? Right, because there were people who did that, and they were people, and they enjoyed it.
And there were a lot of them.
Right, and there were a lot of them, yes, and they weren't so different from you than you think.
Wow.
So that's the thing that I was trying to figure out. I was like, what the hell's at the bottom of that? Well, that was the darkest places I could find to look. There's this story. This is a story of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. So they're off to look for the Holy Grail, which is the container of the redeeming substance. So it's value itself. It's the ultimate value. Well, they don't know where to go look for the Holy Grail. It's the cup that held Christ's blood from the cross, or maybe the cup that he drank at the Last Supper.
Yeah, it was in Indiana Jones, too.
Yeah, that's right, of course. And the Holy Grail is a very, very old idea, and it stands for the ultimate value. Where do you go to look for the ultimate value? Well, the answer in the story of King Arthur and the Holy Grail is all the knights are around a round table because they're all equal. They all decide to go off and look for the round table. So they all go look at the forest, and each knight looks and sees where the forest looks darkest to him, and that's where he starts. It's like, yes, that's wisdom. And I learned that also from Carl Jung. He derived a dictum from alchemy. Inster qualinus invenitur, which means that which you most need to find will be found where you least want to look. Right. But what's so interesting, and this I didn't expect this, is that if you peer into the darkest dark, you find the brightest light. And I never expected that, but that's what happened. I thought, oh, this is horrible even beyond what I could comprehend. But the light that can overcome that exists. The light that can overcome that exists. It's actually real. And I think the instinct that we have that manifests itself within us as meaning, which is what you feel, for example, when you listen to music that you really love. You feel that sense of intrinsic meaning. That meaning is a guide to the light. I mean metaphorically. Right. I mean religiously, but I also mean biologically. Right. I mean in reality. That sense of meaning is the guide to the light that overcomes the darkness. And the darkness is dark. It's really dark. But that means the light has to be that much brighter, and it is. I really believe that.
I love that. And just since you've gone there, it's like it's so real, man. It just seems so real when you say it for some reason, because you've done the work. You've seen, you've tried to start at that darkest spot, and then to still say that.
That's the thing.
Because if that's not the story, though, then there is no story. It's like that has to be the story, that we go, that it ends in positive, that it goes upward. Otherwise, there's nothing. if that's not the story?
Yeah, well, that's a very good way of looking at it. I think that's
So
the
who
case.
would ever choose nothing? It's just such a pointless. There's no.
That's
it's not.
Mephistopheles. It's Satan's dictum that things are so terrible that it would be better if there was nothing at all.
Yeah, that's.
There's a whole line of German literature, speculative literature that was laid out by a man named Goethe, who wrote a play called Faust about a man who sold his soul to the devil for knowledge. And Mephistopheles features in Faust. He's the tempter. He's Satan himself, and his credo is, life is so terrible it would be better if it was replaced by nothing. It's an apocalyptic desire.
I'd hate that though.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, well, that's the thing.
There are times when I didn't know if I would, but
Yeah.
now if I think, and even the first thing that comes to mind, like my little niece, I saw her this weekend, and she would smile.
Yeah.
She had a cup full of potato chips, and she was just laying on a dog's back that she
Right.
just met this dog,
Yeah.
and putting him in his mouth, and I'm like, I know
Better
it's
that
silly.
exists.
Oh, better that exists.
Yes, there you go. That's it.
If a
that's
million
it.
people had lost it, whatever's happened in the past,
Yeah.
there's this one moment right now that makes, and I don't even know if she she's only 2 or something, so
Yeah.
we don't even know each other really.
Yeah.
But there's this one little moment that makes it all worth it.
Well, so, in the last chapter of my book, it's called Pet a Cat When You Encounter One on
Yes.
the Street. And it's about the experiences my family had when my daughter was unbelievably ill and suffering like mad. It's like, well, because that's the real limit case. Is this worthwhile? It's like, well, what about when a child is suffering? An innocent child is suffering terribly. It's like, well, how do you justify that? And part of that is, well, some of the advice in that chapter is practical, but some of it is you notice those things. You notice those little glimmerings of beauty. You notice those little glimmerings of that sort of transcendent reality, and that's what keeps you going. And you saw that with your niece, and you can see those things if you keep your eyes open, right?
Yep,
and you better because they keep you alive.
And what makes me what then I notice if I'm able to do this then afterwards is tell another person about it, even if it's like a man and it seemed like it's kind of like a weird thing to tell a dude. Like it shows some vulnerability for me.
Yeah.
Then
It
that
also shows some ability to pay attention and see them too, man. So that's
but
even
it
better.
makes it gives it even more value. For some reason, like whatever I can do, if I can be vulnerable after it somehow in some way.
Well, it's not just that you're vulnerable, it's that you accept the vulnerability and you transcend it at the same time, which is also what comedians do all the time. Because a comedian always says, ha ha ha, look at how we do all this, aren't we stupid and useless? But we can see that and we can rise above it. And everybody goes, ha, ha, yeah, we are that stupid and useless, but we could rise above it. And then the next joke comes on. And, that's why the jester in the king's court was so valuable, is he was the only person who could tell the king the truth. Right? And the king couldn't get mad because
that was his thing.
the jester was beneath contempt. You could let him say anything he wants. That's why, too, comedians are a good bellwether in a free society. If the comedians don't get... Wherever a comedian can't go, that's a tyranny. Where can't they go? University campuses.
Right. University campuses.
Right. The comedians say, I won't go there. It's like, oh, why is that?
Something's
because
wrong
the
there.
king is so tyrannical, he'll kill the jester. It's like, that's a tyrant.
We have a question that pertains right to that about the... do you have that one, Nick? You know what I'm talking about?
Hey, Theo. Love the show. Big fan of you. Big fan of Professor Peterson. Got a question for Peterson. When does he think that all these Marxist-leaning professors really came to prominence in academia? Because I graduated from a philosophy program in 2011, and it just didn't seem that radical or left-leaning to me, the culture. So I was wondering if there's some very recent change or professors that have risen to prominence, like in the last few years, or if this has been, if I just went to a more level-headed place.
That's a good question. And I was listening to you on Joe Rogan talking about how you believe a lot of this has started with college campuses. A lot of this, some of this wild thought. And anyway, you can answer this question, but...
Well, the ideas have been lurking for a very long time, and they've manifested themselves in various forms of Marxism throughout the 20th century. And of course, that has its historical precursors. I mean, there was quite an upswing of leftist thinking in the 1960s, and then that sort of faded away to some degree through the 70s and 80s, and then it popped back up in the 1990s. There was quite a spike in political correctness in the early 1990s. And then probably because the American economy just started to boom, that sort of faded away. And then in the last 5 years, it's just gone completely, well, it's just, we hit a tipping point of some sort. And why, I don't know. And maybe in the philosophy department, you were somewhat buttressed against that, because philosophy is actually one of the few disciplines on the humanities end of the spectrum that seems to have been relatively uncorrupted. I don't know. I think we hit a tipping point of some sort, and it might also be that more and more administrators have also become politically correct. So it's not just the faculty members, it's also the administrators, and some of that's under legislative pressure, so it's not only the fault of the universities. I don't know. I think that, you know, something can be the same for a long time, be slowly changing. So a larger and larger minority of people are radicalized, and the people with the contrary views are shut out. And then all of a sudden it's so many of them that the whole thing just tips. And something like that has happened. And I mean, it's been quite well documented by people like Jonathan Haidt, is that there are no conservatives in the social sciences. Yeah. So even the liberals, well, like me, that's basically my position politically. It's like I'm a classical liberal. It's like, well, you're a right-winger. It's like only compared to you radical leftists.
That's how I was. I moved out here and I felt like more liberal than the environment I was from. And then I get out here and you can't even, I mean, man, you couldn't even talk during it. I was afraid to talk because of my accent. Because of having a Southern accent anytime during the election. Like, I mean, you can't even imagine.
Wow, man.
I mean, and I mean that. I was afraid
I believe you.
to talk. And that, like, and also from an industry that's supposed to be so accepting. It's like Hollywood's like, we're so accepting of everyone. But yet, you know, and I talk about this when I was like, you know, black actors and actresses were begging for Golden Globes 2 years ago to be included, you know, or in the Academy Awards to be included, you know, saying they weren't getting, like, and there's no one, for the amount of people that live in the area that I'm from, there's nobody, there's 2 or 3 people with Southern accents even on television, you know, or in, like it's, I don't know. I've just never felt less welcome in a place in my life that I fought so hard to get to. And so I've had a troubled relationship with this industry sometimes, but thankfully to things like podcasts and stuff like that, people are starting to at least I can have some sort of a voice because I can, you know, create my own. And my voice isn't even a bad voice. Like, I'm trying to come from a great place, but it's just, I don't know. I've just never felt less welcome, kind of.
Well, you're creating your own audience.
Yeah.
So more power to you.
Yeah.
You know, and you haven't been doing it for very long. So who knows where it'll go.
A year and a half. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And it's amazing how the audience comes and then how they lift you up and that makes you feel, it makes you feel not emboldened, but makes you feel like, man, I can trust my instincts a little bit more.
Right, exactly.
Were you always able to trust your instincts in your life, did you feel like?
I was probably able to. That didn't mean I did.
Yeah. Did you have trouble? I've had trouble calibrating my instincts.
Oh, man. When I was young, when I was about 23 or 24, and I first started to do the work that culminated in my first book, that took me about 15 years. I had this, I outlined it in the preface of the book. I had this experience. I was starting to understand that it was really not a good idea to say things that weren't true, that you didn't believe to be true. And then, so I started thinking that through. And I was also starting to wrestle with this problem of malevolence at the same time. So those two things kind of got tangled together in some way. And I had this experience where I kind of split in some sense. And part of me was the old part that was talking. Like, I was kind of a combative talker, and I'm still, I still talk a lot. It was always been part of my nature. But part of me split off, and it was watching the part that was talking. It was going, well, you don't believe that. That's not really true. That's not really your idea. It's like, you're just saying that to sound smart. You're just trying to win this argument. It's really critical, eh? I thought, what the hell's going on? Either this part that's critical is correct, and the other part is not so good, or the part that's doing most of the talking is good, and what the hell's up with this critical part? I didn't know, and I thought, okay. But I did notice that there were some things the critical part wouldn't object to when I said, wouldn't object. And I thought, okay, what if I tried to not say anything that this critical part objected to? And so then I'd say something and it would object, and I think, no, I didn't get that right. And then I'd try to reformulate it and continue to reformulate it. And then finally, I got to the point where I stopped saying most of those things, and this critical part stopped objecting. And then I noticed that all of the things that I was saying that the critical part was objecting to were actually things that were making me weak.
Wow. And they're not full truths?
No, they weren't. They weren't at all. Like I thought, 95% of what I said was some sort of lie.
Right.
Whoa, 95%, man. That's a lot.
But that's similar
it was
to
a lot.
comedy. It's similar to comedy. In the beginning of comedy, it's like I'm just telling jokes to learn how to tell jokes a lot of times. I'm saying making up stuff. And then now I've gotten more authentic. And that's when things have definitely gotten better.
Right. Well, it is associated with that authenticity, right? To find your authentic voice.
Yeah.
Right. Which is the voice that you have a right to. Something like that. And
Yeah.
that you also have taken responsibility for. Both of those
that's
things.
interesting. Though, a voice that you have a right to.
Yeah. Well, because I
Never
had these
thought about it
ideas
like
that I could say, but they weren't my ideas. I didn't have a right to them. I hadn't earned them. Even though I could formulate the ideas, I'd taken them from books, say.
Wow.
So I could be a mouthpiece for the ideas, but I
Right.
didn't have a right to them. They weren't mine. I hadn't earned them.
Yeah, and that's crazy. I feel like there's a different type of person in the world that has had to take responsibility for themselves, you know, and has had to earn their voice.
Right, then they have a real voice.
They have a real voice, and they're not just saying stuff. They're
They're not
just
braying like a donkey.
Yes.
That's what happens in Pinocchio, right?
Yeah.
He ends up transformed into a braying jackass because he isn't saying the truth.
Yeah.
Right, you're a braying jackass. It's like, well, you have to earn it. You have to rescue your father from the abyss in order to earn your voice.
Yeah.
Right, so yeah, that's exactly right. Down into the depths, into
You have
the
to earn
darkness.
it. Get in there. Get in there. Let's hear. Yeah, this is good. Let's hear this.
And this is more of a comment for both of you, not a question.
I just want to call in and say thank you to both you gentlemen, because I'm at a better place now in my life than I've ever been, you know, and those are big changes from the man that I was 6 months ago, you know, and both of you were there when the gears started turning. You've been there throughout, and I'm making this call right now, so I just want to say thanks, man. I hope you guys continue to do what you do, you know, to give people like me out here strength and guidance, you know, and people like the man that I was 6 months ago, because I wasn't stagnant 6 months ago, you know, I was getting worse, you know, and I've done nothing but get better. So that gap just continues to widen as things go on. And I don't know, it's just such a powerful thing. It's just such a powerful thing that you two do, and I hope that you keep it up. You know, I pray that you do, and God bless both of you. Thank you.
Hey, man,
Nice guy.
that's a good video. That's a good video, man. Yeah, that's great. That's great. And
Right,
he's
it's
right.
great.
You don't stay stagnant, you get worse. Like
Yeah.
a swamp doesn't stop rotting, right? The rot just gets deeper and deeper. There's no stagnant and staying the same. There's just stagnant and worse. So that was great. That's what it's like doing this tour.
Yeah.
And, you know, you could tell that he looked great.
He was sincere.
He looked great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he was sincere, right? And so it's moving. It's that sincerity. You talked about your cells moving, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, sincerity is moving. It moves you to a better place. That was great. And that's the sort of thing that people are telling me when I'm out on this tour. It's like,
And when
you
the
never
people-
get tired of that. It's like, yes, right on, man.
Right.
Things are better for you. Hooray.
And is there any way that you notice you were able to keep from that building up, like that landing in an educational place for you, and that landing in an ego place for you?
Oh, well, I'm just like, well, I'm not attributing it to myself.
Right.
I'm attributing it to to the degree that I've been able to facilitate that. It's because I've had the privilege
Right.
of having the time to read all these great clinicians and to put that into practice. It's like the wisdom I'm not inventing the wisdom that helps people redeem themselves.
Right. You're just a Sherpa.
Yes, that's exactly it, to the degree that I can be, you know. And so I'm not taking credit for this. I learned this from Carl Jung too. He wrote an essay called The Relation Between the Ego and the Unconscious, which is exactly about this. It's a hard essay to know what it's about unless you know what it's about. And this is what it's about. He said, don't mistake yourself for the wisdom. Don't do that. It's like, because the wisdom is eternal.
Right. The
Right.
wisdom will be here.
The wisdom was
and
here
it was
before you, and it will be here after you're gone. And maybe if you're fortunate, you can bridge the gap. You can tap into it. You can dip your cup into it. Maybe you can do that. But it's like, you know, you're the surfer and you're not the wave. It's
Right.
like you might be the cup, but you're not the well. And so you need to know that. And so when I hear this, I think, well, yeah, what I hear is, yeah, this information had the same effect on me. So yes, hooray. But I don't think, well,
like that.
man, I've done that. It's like, no, I'm pleased to be a part of it is what I think. I'm pleased to be a part of it. And that's definitely the case.
Yeah. What I hear is that you're grateful to be the cup. You remind yourself of that.
Well, and I'm so happy. I think when I hear someone say that, I think, okay, A, you're not descending towards hell. And that's great, because if you go to hell deep enough, you can take a lot of people with you.
Yeah.
So at minimum, this gentleman is much less likely to do reprehensible and terrible things. That's a big plus. But it also looks like he's on
doing
the
good
path.
stuff.
Yeah, he's on the path. He's doing more for himself, and maybe he's going to be good for other people too. It's like God only knows how that might manifest itself, because people are quite remarkable. And if they stop getting in their own way, it's like the sky's the limit, right? And really,
It really
truly,
is.
the sky really is the limit. We're
really
amazing
is.
creatures, man. God only knows what we could come up with.
Yeah.
I mean, look what we've come up with in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
So, and who knows where we could go, especially if all of us were pulling together, man. Who knows where we could end up?
I love it. Nick, you want to play another one?
You know, Dr. Peterson, I'm a big admirer of yours, and I really enjoyed your event at the Beacon Theater in New York City back in March. But my question to you is, how do you manage to keep your cool in confrontations and highly stressful situations? You know, you're kind of like a Canadian psychology version of the Fonz, in my opinion. And one situation I'd like to refer to is during the Monk debate, where Michael Dyson, I think his name is, he made that comment referring to you as a mean, mad white man. And, you know, you managed to stay on topic, not let it, you know, make you angry or anything. You know, I'm sure there's things you wanted to say to him. You still managed to stay on topic and keep your cool. So, you know, any advice on how to do that would be great.
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great
When we
question.
get rattled, how do we stay cool
Yeah.
so we can stay on message and stay on in direction?
Well, you have to kind of decide what you're aiming at, you know, and I mean in a fundamental sense, because that helps you stay oriented. You know, I'm not trying to bring excess damage into the world. And so partly what you do is when you're attacked is you can defend yourself with minimal necessary force. And I really mean it's a real art to use minimum force, and it works way better. It's a way more effective form of defense. And so, like, I didn't let what he said go unopposed. I said that to him that there was no excuse to bring, like, he can call me a mean, mad man. That's fine, because maybe it's true, and he's certainly entitled to that opinion. But to add white to that just seemed to bring an arbitrary element of racism in, and so that's what I said, and that was a good enough defense. But also in those public fora, it doesn't hurt at all to let people expose their agenda. And so if you're attacked, you think, well, is this a good thing or a bad thing? It's like, well, it's an awkward thing, and it can be an aggravating thing, but it isn't necessarily a bad thing to let people who are attacking you for unwarranted reasons reveal their full agenda.
You can see their weapons then.
Well, yeah, and you can see them.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, what are you up to attacking me? Well, it's because you're bad. It's like, maybe go on with your attack.
Right.
Well, maybe it has nothing to do with me.
Right. Now
so-
you're learning a lot about me.
Yes, that's the question: is who is this attack about? Well, maybe it's about me. Maybe it's about you.
Yeah.
And so if that's public, it's like I'm willing, to the degree that I can manage this, I'm willing to allow the attacks to progress, because I'm hoping that they might be about the attacker and not about me. You know, and it's a hairy game in some sense, a high-stress game, because there are things about me, you know, because no one's perfect, that's for sure. And so some of the punches land, but most of the time, and this has happened over and over again, it's like, no, the attacks reveal more about the attacker than me.
Yeah.
And so that's been good. And so then that's a strange thing. It's like, well, why should I be thinking that this attack is bad? It's uncomfortable, it's stressful, and all of that. But some of the best things that have happened to me, let's say over the medium to long run, in the last 2 years, have emerged directly from the most vicious and unwarranted attacks. It's like, well, no, they didn't use knives, so that's good because
Right,
you don't recover from that. So I know there's a limit to this sort of argumentation.
When you, I liken that as similarly in comedy. Sometimes I used to think it's always me saying stuff that is the funniest or can build up the most credibility with the audience. But now I'm realizing it's almost times when I'm silent that reveals more about the story sometimes. It's a little bit of an inverse of what you're saying.
Well, judicious use of silence is quite helpful, And,
right, but I never thought of that as like being something that would reveal anything.
Right.
Whereas you would never think if somebody attacks you, sitting in silence or, minimal response,
being the most effective response.
Right, because retaliation, that's retaliation.
Yeah.
It's not even, it's so unorganized.
Well, and the thing is, you do have the right and maybe even the responsibility to defend yourself, but the question is, well, what's the most effective defense? And it's sort of like when you're disciplining children. It's like, well, how much force do you use? The minimum necessary, the absolute minimum necessary. Now, that takes a lot of judicious interaction. It takes a lot of judgment to get that absolutely right. But it's the same in a public forum. It's like, well, how hard should I defend myself? Well, it turns out my experience has taught me over and over, minimum necessary force. And so it's probably even better. Well, it's not better to err on the side of less force. You don't want to err at all. But little detachment, little patience, a little faith in the judgment of the audience. That's the other thing. It's like, that's the other thing I think is like, if this everything plays out, then people will make the right judgment.
Right.
Not everyone, of course, not everyone. But wisdom will prevail. Right, that's what I think. I'm willing to see if that's the case. Willing to assume that will be the case.
Do you? How do you prep for debate? Is it like, do you have a Gatorade or something before? What do you do?
Bubbly water. Well, the only thing I eat is like sparkling water and meat. So I have some sparkling. It's so funny because I'm on these tours, and if you're renting theaters, they ask you, well, what do you want before the tour, right? So you can pretty much specify whatever you want.
Like Perrier and prosciutto.
Yeah. Well, that's like, I'll have six bubbly water. It's like, that's all you want? It's like, yeah, I know it's really sad. I could have 20 dancing girls and a whole buffet. If you got some water, put some bubbles in it, man, because we'll have a real party then.
What is like a and I know you have your special diet, but what's a guilty pleasure kind of? What do you tell me? You have a Reese cup, a peanut butter cup.
Oh,
man. What do you have?
Well, I'm really, that's all I'm eating, and I never cheat. Like, that's it, period. That's what I eat. Now, I'm hoping to expand that outward again as I experiment with what I can tolerate. But right now, it's like, it's religious. I never cheat. I eat beef and salt and water. And that's it. I know, it's crazy, man.
Wow, you're like crazy. A ninja. It almost sounds like you sound like a rare Japanese creature.
It's ridiculous, man. But it works.
Yes.
That's the thing. It's helped me a lot, and it's cured my daughter.
And it works for you. And it works for your blood type. It works for your daughter.
It's working for anyone else, but it does work for her. And it has worked for my wife as well. So,
what is something special that...
Music is a pleasure. I mean, I have a car. I rented a Mustang GT, which I really like. It's a convertible, and it's got a nice loud stereo. And so I love loud music. I love zooming around in sports car and listening to loud music. I really like that. I could do that. I did that all the time when I was a kid.
Did you?
It wasn't a sports car, but
what kind of music you listening to? I could see some James Blake maybe, or some Chopin.
Oh, I
don't even know if I said it right.
You can't really listen to classical music in a convertible because the dynamic range is so high, you miss most of it.
And you're creeping people out.
Well, there's that too. It's like, what the hell's up with you, buddy? But no, I listen to all sorts of dinosaur rock, but I have a big collection of music that goes right from the 1930s till now, and my son and my daughter both feed me relatively new music.
Nice.
Like for me, if it's 5 years old, it's still new. I really like Arcade Fire, Canadian band. I think they're bloody great. I like Beach House. I like a band named, I can't remember the name. It's like Devotchka. They're from Seattle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they play a kind of a Russian-oriented folk rock, which but it's fairly heavy rock. I really like that. I really think they're great. I like Gogol Bordello, They say, "Oh man, they're wild." They have a song called "Start Wearing Purple." You should watch it. The lead singer, is just a wild man. He has an accent that you cannot believe exists.
Really?
It sounds like a parody of an Eastern European accent.
Right.
He sounds like he's putting
Like
it on.
Borat or something?
Yeah, like that, exactly.
Yeah.
He's like Borat. if that's right. If Borat had a rock band, this would be at Gogol Bordello. I love them.
We'll have to-
I love Tom Waits.
I'll check him out. Yeah, no, I've
love
heard that.
Tom Waits, man. I think he's absolutely great. And he's one of those guys that's just tough as a bloody boot.
Yeah.
I love to watch him with, who's the talk show host that always made fun of everybody. He just retired.
David Letterman?
Letterman, yeah, because Letterman was pretty haughty
liked
guy,
Letterman.
eh? I like Letterman too. But he was pretty much, no celebrity intimidated him.
Right.
Tom Waits, man, intimidated him completely.
I'm going to have to go back and watch
It's
some of
really
that.
fun because
Is it?
like Letterman's like a little kid around Tom Waits. Well, and Tom Waits is so tough and cool and such a
Yeah.
bloody genius and every time he puts out an album, I think, oh, Jesus, Tom, you just went off the deep end this time. It's too damn much. I can't listen to this. It's too harsh. Then I listen to it like 5 times and I think, God, you hit it out of the park again. So.
What about like Leonard Cohen? Did you listen to him?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I loved Leonard Cohen.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really sad when he died. I saw a concert of Leonard Cohen about 5 years ago, and he was like 82, and it was like a religious experience, man.
Wow.
Everybody gave him a standing ovation when he showed up. It was at the Sony Center, so the acoustics were great, and he just bloody nailed it. He got better and better as he got older. Like
When
Johnny
the
Cash.
walls came
Cash
down.
Cash got better too. His last few albums, man. He was in a transcendent space, man. That
The Zone.
song. Yeah, he was in the zone. He was in the old guy zone, that's for sure. Yeah.
Do you feel like things changing as you get a little bit older? Because I mean, you seem very young, and you look extremely healthy.
It's that all beef diet, man.
It is, huh? Yeah. No, you definitely seem like I'm surprised we didn't catch you eating grass out front. But do you start to feel anything?
That's
like
for herbivores.
Do you start to feel anything? No, because you turned into a cow. I mean,
Yeah.
But do you start to feel anything being different as you get older? Like, are you noticing anything or?
Well, my family means more and more to me.
Wow.
I would say that's become. I mean, they've always meant a lot to me,
but you notice that even deepens.
Oh yeah,
as
definitely. That's why you want to have kids, man. Is because you're going to get old. It's not the only reason to have kids, and there's lots of reasons to have kids. But the older you get, the more important your family is. And so because I don't know why it is exactly. I don't know why exactly, but it maybe because you get smarter, you get wiser. It's like, yeah, you guys are really important to me. It's really important that we do this right. So,
and maybe you want something in the world to know that you loved it. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, there's that. I mean, that's right. That's the focus of
right.
the love you get. That's where it is, and that turns out that's really important. So, yeah. So, and I have a new grandchild, and that's really cool.
Ooh.
She's how old is she now? She must be about 9 months old. I haven't seen her for a month.
That's fun because they start really moving around.
Oh
and
yeah,
becoming
she's zooming
people.
around now, man.
That's such a blessing.
Yeah.
We have one more question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
I guess relating to children, here's one about Santa Claus.
Okay. I love Santa.
What's up, Theo? Just want to say, love your podcast. This message is for Jordan Peterson. I want to know how you go about addressing Santa Claus with children, and when and what age is a good time to make sure that he's not the last kid to know. Because you don't want him to be the first kid to know, but you don't want him to be the last kid to know.
Yeah.
Especially in Canada, you guys are closer to Santa, so you guys have to deal with this more.
Yeah, exactly. It's more real, man.
Oh, yeah.
It's a good question. I would say, like, if you're doing everything you can to reward your kid for being awake and alert and figuring things out, you probably don't have to worry about it, because if he's sharp and with it, he won't be the first or the last. He won't, and if he's the first, he won't tell the other kids and spoil it either if he's together. So I would say, don't worry about it too much. It's a good game to play with kids, Santa Claus, and it is kind of based on the idea that if you're good, there'll be something in it for the future. And so, you might think, well, it's a lie to tell your kids that Santa Claus exists, but it's not a lie. It's a game. It's like a drama or a play. It's a lot. I mean, like a movie isn't a lie, right? It's fictional, but it's not a lie.
It's a story.
Well, Santa Claus, it's a story, and Santa Claus is a fiction. It's a little theater that you have with your family, and your kid will clue in and start asking. And I'd say when they ask, you can say, look, it's a game that we played and it's a fun game and it's for kids. And now you're older and good for you. You're growing up and you figured it out, and you give them a pat for being so smart. And you say, well, when you're older, you can play Santa Claus with your kids and then you'll have fun too. So you get it, because it's a bit of a loss when a kid figures out that Santa Claus doesn't exist, and maybe they feel like a bit of a fool and that they can't trust their parents. Although they don't usually. But if you tell them, look, it's a game. It's a theatrical game and you play it for kids. Now you clued in, and so it means you're getting older and more mature, and you give them a pat and you say, good for you, and like, wasn't that fun? And then that's the end of that. And then you can do it again when you have grandkids if you're lucky.
Yeah.
So, but if you reward your kid for being sharp, they'll figure it out, and you don't have to worry about that too much.
Is there is it tough having you as a parent, you think, for your kids?
You mean now?
Yeah.
I think it's probably always been tough in some ways because I'm kind of a strange person, you know? But I think it's
you're definitely a unique person. Okay, so yeah, I guess that's what I mean. Like, I guess what has it been like? You feel like for your kids having Jordan Peterson as a parent?
Well, I think it's been good. I have a really good relationship with both of them, you know, and I've had a good relationship with my kids ever since they were little. I really liked being with them, and I liked them when they were little kids. I liked them when they were toddlers. I liked them when they were teenagers. We've had a fine relationship the whole way through, and we still have a really good relationship. So I think it's been really good. You know, I've always assumed that given the opportunity, they would be sufficiently sensible, and I called on them a lot, you know, to be sensible. Both my daughter and my son. It was complicated with my daughter because she was so sick. But my son, he's been a damn trooper, and like I expected right from the time he was little, it's like I expected him to abide by the truth and to be a responsible person right from the time he was little, and he always was. And like, he was in on the decisions, and he was great. His sister relied on him when she was sick, and he was around, and he didn't cause any excess trouble. He was no, you know, my son Julian, he's perfectly capable of getting into the appropriate amount of trouble and not afraid to do it.
Yeah.
But he kept it to himself, and he didn't bring any of his troubles home except when it was absolutely necessary, and he didn't add any additional burden to us while we were completely swamped with my daughter's illness. And so I was incredibly impressed with that.
Wow.
That was between when he was 13 and 16 or so. Yeah. And
you would think a kid would then, because, you know, if anything, they also might have some unknown jealousy that they're feeling because of the child getting the attention.
Of course. Well, my daughter even got jealous of herself because she was jealous because her illness got all the attention. Right. And so it was worse in some sense for my son.
How did that test your, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no.
How did it test your faith when your daughter got ill? Did you have a lot of fear there?
Well, it just made not being in hell more important.
Right.
Right. Because there was no time for that.
Yeah.
There was barely enough time to keep things happening. Any additional trouble, we would have been done.
Yeah.
So luckily, we had got the trouble to a minimum by that point. My wife and I, our relationship was good. My relationship was solid with my son. It was solid with my parents. It was solid with my in-laws. Like, everything was put in place. And of course, that was most important with the immediate family. And that was, thank God, you know, the ark was caulked. There were no chinks between the timbers. When the flood came, we didn't founder and sink.
We were a team.
Yeah, we were a team, and thank God, because there's no way we would have made it otherwise. My daughter wouldn't have made it, and God only knows what that would have done to the rest of us. So, and we did make it, and she's healthy now, and so thank God for that. It's a miracle.
When you're out of town, like you're on tour right now, how does your wife deal with that at home?
Tammy comes with me.
Oh, she does?
Yeah, she travels with me.
I saw a cute, we had a caller that called in and said they didn't see you laugh very much. In like, you know, and obviously you're debating.
I've been sick for 2 years, so that's been kind of
But then I saw a video of you talking about your wife when you guys were kids, and you were laughing all the way through it, and I thought it was just pretty charming.
Yeah, we laughed plenty today.
Yeah?
Yeah, well, today with you.
Oh, that's true.
Away, man. Yeah.
We had a nice time.
Yeah, we did.
Jordan, thank you so much. Like, we just, you know, we really appreciate you being here.
Hey, it was a pleasure talking with you and with your audience.
Yeah, and
appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and we'll be following and supporting and learning and questioning as you move forward. And yeah, we're just, I guess, all of us feel like we're on like this journey together, and we're glad that, you know, we're not alone out there.
Absolutely, man. So that's great. It's great to have an opportunity to talk to your audience, and I wish them well.
Yep, I know you do. Thank you so much.
Now I'm just floating on the breeze, and I feel I'm falling like these leaves. I must be cornerstone. gonna take a little time for me to set that parking brake and let myself unwind. Shine.